Right. Right.
When Tim goes, you can sit there.
Councillor Bevan, when Tim goes, you'll be able to take that chair. It'll only be a second. Only for a second. We've actually started the meeting, so... No, it's fine. The first item on the agenda is welcome, introduction and apologies.
Can you get my card, please?
So I'd like to welcome all members and officers to the first Cleaner Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee of this new council. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings. I have not received notice that members or invited attendees wish to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. As a reminder, may I remind you that this meeting is being webcast. Therefore, can I ask you to turn off, silence your mobile phones, and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. I'm just assuming you've all logged on and etc. For your information, there are no planned fire drills today, but in case of a fire alarm sounding, please follow the signs to exit the building. Could I also remind all members to sign the attendance register and confirm if any apologies have been received for this meeting? We have had two apologies, I believe, Councillor Parish and
Councillor Evans.
Councillor Evans. As there's quite a number of new faces, can I ask if we go around the table? So I'll start. I'm Councillor Peter Jones, the chair of this committee. I'm the councillor for Toolocks and Hentless, and we'll go this way.
I'm Rachel Buell, I'm the Democratic Services Officer.
Tim James, the legal officer.
Stuart Lawrence, Sports Development Manager.
Dave Congreve, Communities.
Sally Partridge, I'm Farm Director at Green Meadow Community Farm.
Alan Williams, Co-opted Member.
Charles Davis, I'm a second ward member.
Councillor Dave Thomas, Lantana Ward.
Stuart Ashley, Councillor Pontnewid.
Jason O'Connell, councillor for Green Meadow.
Councillor Louise Shepherd, Vethyn Ward.
Gwyn Smith, Co-opted.
Catherine Turner, Scrutiny Officer.
And obviously we mustn't forget Councillor Hugh Bevan, who will be sitting in the chair in a second. Okay, the second item on the agenda is declarations of interest. Could I ask if any members should have any declarations of interest, that they declare them now, and that Tim is here from legal to give any advice if required? I believe there are two declarations of interest, potentially.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Two declarations I'm aware of. Councillor O'Connell, I believe you wish to declare a personal but non-prejudicial interest in relation to the item agenda relating to the farm, because you're a member of the Shadow Farm Board. Is that correct? That is correct. And then Councillor Ashley, personal non-prejudicial interest for the same reason, and also you wish to point out that you're a member of Cumbraon Community Council, I believe.
That's correct.
Any other questions from any members in relation to declarations? Thank you, Chair.
Tim, you're going to leave the meeting now, I believe. Here you can, Councillor Bevan's going to take the spare seat.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll just wait for Councillor Bevan to join us, and then we can move on to the next item on the agenda. Are you logged on, Councillor Bevan?
Yeah, I've done it.
You've done it. Okay. Item 3 on the agenda is the minutes of the meeting held on the 21st of March 2017. Please could I ask those members who were on this committee in March to scan through the minutes for accuracy and confirm that the minutes are an accurate account of the meeting, please.
That's me. I've looked through there. I'm content that it reflects the discussion as far as I can recall. The one thing I would like to ask, if you are aware, did we get a positive response on the concluding questions? Do you know?
We've next item on the agenda is an update on
Actions.
actions.
Yeah, sorry, I'll ask it then. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
No, as far as I know, I'm the only member that was here, so I have to do both bits, as far as I can see.
We'll accept the minutes as a true record. If we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the update on any actions outstanding. Rachel?
The action sheet's just for noting.
Yeah. I will come back on that and say recommendation to be sent to the relevant exec committee and agreed, but we don't appear to have an outcome back from that. So it was on energy management, not the anything back from that one.
Yeah, we would have had recommendations and they will have come back to you back in April probably. Do you want them to be sent back out to you?
I think we need to send them back out and just have a reflection. We'll bring that back on the next meeting.
Yes. Yeah.
It's actually quite an important issue.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll then reflect on it.
Stuart, you turn your mic on.
Sorry. The only reason is I have another role in the council as sustainability champion, and actually that's an issue that probably needs reflecting on there. Thanks.
So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the most important part of this meeting, really, the proposed transfer of Green Meadow Farm to a non-profit distributing organisation. Can I just start by, I know we did introductions, but I'd like to formally welcome Dave Congreve, the Assistant Chief Executive Communities, Stuart Lawrence, the Sports Development Manager, and Sally Partridge, the Farm Director, to the meeting. Could I ask officers to give us a brief overview of the main points in the report to kick off the discussions, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll assume that a lot of people have, or many people have had a chance to read through the report in detail, so I'll just pull out some of the key points that I think are positioned within the sort of opening part of the report. And I guess before rehearsing some of those, one of the things to hold in your mind as you're talking about the farm really is that actually the farm is in the financial context of the overall council. So although we're talking about a future for the farm, one of the things that, the thing that is driving the discussions really is about the council's overall budget. So hang on to that thought because it becomes quite important, I think, when we start to look at some of the detail of things and some of the choices that may still have to be made going forward as far as the council's concerned. So key points, start with the money, I guess. Existing council intent, and that intent came from the then members of the council looking at the then medium-term service and financial plan, and concluding that in a number of areas, members of the council wanted to see some quicker progress on some savings and some deeper progress on some savings, and the farm was selected as one of those areas. The current resources available for it are currently include a reserve amount that was put in to help us try and make that transition. So when that reserve money goes, the budget for the farm will step down in any event. And the figures are included in the first bullet point there. And that the intent from the council's point of view was to try and get the operating budget of the farm as close to that £248,000 per annum as is possible. And that becomes important as we go through it. So to try and make that kind of a saving, to pursue that, and certainly those members of the committee who were around or members of the council who were around at the time will know that we looked at a whole range of options, including some quite radical ones, and reference to those is made again back in this report, just so that you're aware that officers have got things like a capital value on the farm should members think about disposal options in the future or other ways of doing things. But I think the conclusion at that point in time was very much along the lines of we saw the benefits from operating the farm as a community asset, and those benefits were worth hanging on to, provided we could make some savings at the farm. So it's very much about trying to pursue a strategy that was very good for the farm and trying to sustain the long-term future of the farm, which is going to be a challenge, I think, for many council assets. Over the page then, so the way in which that strategy about trying to hang on to the benefits that the farm was producing but still reduce costs, the way that that was agreed that it would be pursued was that we would look at the possibility of transferring to a non-profit distributing organisation. That's the NPDO. There are lots of different forms that a non-profit distributing organisation can come in, and reference in the report is let, and there are other people around the table who will know the detail better than me. Reference around the table is made to, reference in the report is made to organisations like Torvine Leisure Trust, which is a form of non-profit distributing organisation. So it was agreed that we would look at an NPDO simply because NPDOs have a range of financial regimes that are different from the council. So an NPDO will be able to do things like reduce its payment on non-national domestic rate, will be able to claim back some aspects of VAT, may be able to claim some aspects of gift aid, will be eligible to apply for grants that the council and other public sector organisations wouldn't be able to do that. So those were the rationale behind an NPDO. And in consequence then, we went through a process of identifying who and how we might partner with a non-profit distributing organisation to see whether we could actually get at some of those savings. That process hasn't happened as quickly as we would like, and we're quite happy to talk about why that is the case, and the details in the report. But where it leaves us at the moment is that because we have to start at this time of year about planning our budget for the next financial year, so the council's budget runs from April the 1st to 31st of March, so we need to start planning that now. Clearly, we need to have a plan, if it's not going to be able to get the NPDO in place by then, to at least achieve as many of those savings as is possible, so we're following the same intent that the council set out. So the third bullet point down on the page 20 talks about some alternatives that are being considered at the moment and are being put forward as part of closing that gap around the pricing strategy and some changes to the catering. I think the second half of that bullet point is quite important, really, in the sense that there's a reference made there to sort of saying, unless now, certainly, and from Sally's point of view, as the most experienced operational manager of the farm, if we wanted to save considerably more money, if you as a council wanted to save considerably more money at the farm, it's certainly our view, and certainly Sally's view in particular, that that would be very difficult under some of the existing arrangements. So there's a reference there to saying, actually, there are some fundamental cost elements that, because we are part of the council, are probably higher than they would be for some other types of organisation. And that's absolutely fine. That's a good council policy to have. But it is something that is a consideration if you wish to think about more significant savings at the farm. Fourth bullet point down then sort of just talks about, right, well, okay, we think there are two figures there. So if we're able to save that 57k, then what we think we can do is get the budget down to around 264k, which is still a little bit more than the council intended and wanted to save. So obviously any difference between the two has to be saved somewhere else, and that's an important theme as well, I think, if we're talking about where savings need to be made. Any changes to the farm, really, if they're not yielded at the farm, will need to be yielded in another part of the council services. So where we've got to, in terms of the process that we've been following, in terms of the work that has happened, is set out, I think, and in terms of the executive members' views on all of those things, is set out in the final bullet point on page 20, or the one just above it, that is that we think we can make some operational changes whilst we continue to look at how we might engage with an NPDO. Those operational savings could get us around 57k. We still think, or certainly the executive member still thinks, that the strategy of completing the discussions of transfer should be pursued, and we can continue to work with Groundwork Wales, as we'll talk about later on, with a view to concluding those by January, so we know exactly where we are in terms of that financial year, if we're able to conclude those conversations by January. The view is that actually, if we are able to conclude those conversations and that transfer could take place at around the sort of level that we've got to in terms of our own thinking, then it should be progressed, but there's a whole range of other issues around that, including the treatment of one-off costs, including how we might be thinking about capital investment and so on in the future. But if we're unable to do that, then I think then it's a question of, right, well, what next for the farm? Are members happy? Is the overall council happy that in the context of all of your spending, that we've arrived at a point where you are content to fund the farm at the level that we think we can operate it at, or would you we wishing to pursue a different strategy at that point in time? So I guess that's, Chair, where we've got to in terms of the headlines. The scrutiny activity, I think, that was talked about from the scrutiny officer's point of view and yourself as Chair, I think, was to focus that discussion on, do we think that strategy, I'll take them in a slightly different order, do we think that strategy remains valid? Are you satisfied with the progress and diligence exercised in pursuing what we've tried to do in terms of implementing that strategy? And are you content with the proposed next steps, including the wider implications? And those wider implications clearly are around the farm's position within the council's overall budget. Thank you, Chair. If I leave it there and then take any questions which we'll try and field between us.
Yeah, that's fine. Deputy turn your mic off, please. Thanks. As a scrutiny committee, we actually met at the farm on Monday, so we had a pre-meeting. We had thanks to Sally, we had a tour of the farm, and then we had detailed discussions, and we've, based on those themes that you've just outlined, we've come up with a range of questions that will explore in greater detail the report. So to kick off our discussions, I'm going to invite Councillor Thomas. The first question is around Green Meadow Farm mission statement. So, Councillor Thomas, do you want to start the discussion today, please?
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. Yeah, Dave, as Councillor Jones just said, when we were walking around the farm, looking at this, that and the other, one of the main things that came up in the meeting, which we were all confused with, I suppose, was what Torfaen Council actually wanted from the asset. So I think that's definitely my main question to you, and I'm sure everyone else felt the same, is what exactly does Torfaen Council want with this asset?
I think that's a really interesting question, actually, and I think three things. One is, I guess, the way to answer that question would be to say, if at this point in time you were thinking about providing a farm, why would you do it? And I think there's a reference in the report to saying the farm is literally unique provision. There are lots of city farms where people can go and access the benefits of learning about the countryside, perhaps take part in some training activities, perhaps meet as a community group down there, perhaps understand more about countryside education and sustainability, perhaps just enjoy a good day out with their children. And I think our farm does all of those things. But I think it's a good question in the sense that I think we've struggled. At different points in the time, the council has debated, is it a visitor attraction? Is it a community resource? Is it for sustainability? Is it for education? And of course, it's all of those things, which from a business point of view is quite difficult, really, because actually you're trying to be all things to all people. Part of what Groundwork Wales are suggesting is that one of the things that if we're able to develop this proposal with them, they would be looking to be a little bit clearer about the three main things that the farm was seeking to achieve. So they're talking about perhaps enhancing three particular parts of that offer in their documentation. They're talking about work-based learning and a range of other things as well. How feasible that is, I don't know, because my own view, and I'll invite Sally to into the conversation, and Stuart, anybody else really, is that actually having developed as all things to all people, if there isn't a clear market to move into, so for example, if we were clear about saying, actually our objective here is to totally minimise the cost of the farm. If that was your objective as a council, and you were then sort of saying, right, well, okay, to minimise the cost of that, actually there's a gap in the market for stables or for residential holidays for riding or whatever else, we'd probably look at that and investigate it and move the farm to that place. But then, of course, you wouldn't have all of those other things. It would no longer be a tourist attraction, a community resource, a place where people go and learn about sustainability and all the other things. So last time this was debated, I think members of the Shadow Board in particular, I think, have held on to that view that the farm is unique. It does a whole range of things, and it is relevant that at the point that it was put in place, it was also put in place to safeguard a large trunk of open space in the new town, as it was at that point in time. So the answer to your question is, what does the council want from it? I think it's a question I need to I think it is well worth more debate. I mean, what the council gets from it is a range of benefits. I guess what the question for you guys is, in the context of a £16 million funding gap over the next 4 years, how important is it that you pay £240,000 a year for that mixture of benefits. And that's a question really that only you can answer, because you also pay those things for a mixture of other things that are important to you. That's the cost of operating a whole range of other facilities, like a nursery for young children, like a set of social care arrangements and so on. So it's a really interesting question. The answer to it is, at the moment, we provide a whole range of benefits, which you will have seen when you've been down there. There are benefits for a whole range of different client groups. We believe that the cost of those is now bottomed out almost at whereabouts we've got to in terms of our revenue budget under the current operating model. And I guess it's really a debate for council then as to, is that an acceptable balance between what you get from it and what the community gets from it, because I mean it is very highly valued within the community, against the cost of providing it, and comparing that with other things. So long answer, but I think the point being, it's unique provision. I think if you were a council now with an idea about saying, actually, in the current set of circumstances, should we spend an amount establishing a community farm, you'd want to be much clearer about what you want from it. And that opportunity is still there. If you wanted from it, as a council, actually the most important thing is that we just protect the open space, then you can do that without making it a tourist attraction or a community resource. And you can change the cost. Yeah?
Did you have anything else? Come in.
Declare the other interest, which is obviously I'm the chair of the Shadow Board, and I've been in that discussion about the protection of the open space. What is, Dave, what is the social and financial cost of protecting that space? Because that's a discussion we had quite often, isn't it? And I know you're smiling because it's one of the it was the
just to include others in the debate that's happened at the Shadow Board, when I think that whole issue about protecting the open space in Cwmbran and making sure that there is, that sort of buffer zone, if you like, around that area, was one of the very original intents of the farm. So some members of the Shadow Board who've got that long association with the farm still see that as a huge role that the farm plays in a growing new town. And there are benefits associated with that. The question about how much does it cost, I don't know. The point is, because we don't cost it in that way, if you remember we had that conversation, the point is, if you wanted to maintain that space without it being a visitor attraction, there would still be a cost of maintenance and a few other things. It wouldn't be the cost that is associated with running it as a attraction, a community resource and so on, but there would be a cost still.
Briefly, what I would say, we actually have I can never remember his name, the former borough treasurer on. He always makes that point, doesn't he? And he sees that as a very valuable. I come very late to that conversation. I probably don't buy it as much as they do, but it's something the community council and other people in Cwmbran hold very dear, that set of group. And you go to other new towns, it seems to be a common feature in all of them, to be honest.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask a question, please, Dave. You mentioned different models, potentially going forward. I mean, we'll probably come on to that in more detail as the questions continue. But it was obvious when we went round that there are a number of facilities on site at the moment that are deteriorating, degraded, and warrant significant capital expenditure, as indeed would some of the proposals the alternatives that you mentioned there, in terms of stabling and residential riding and all the rest of it. That would require significant investment. The problem is we've got our hands tied as the council at the moment, because all of the capital expenditure is going on the 21st Century's schools programme, to the exclusion and the detriment of everything else. But I think that the question that was brought up by my colleague over there in terms of the overall vision and strategy of how we want to see this being taken forwards. There was a consensus from the last Oversight and Scrutiny meeting after we'd undertaken the initial meeting, and that feeling was echoed, and that sentiment was echoed by the other members around here today after the second and subsequent meeting, that this is a valuable and significant asset for the community, and if we want to keep it going, then we have to say, well, how much are we going to be prepared to pay for it going forwards? And you know, as you said, it's going to be to the detriment to other aspects of the budgetary proposals, but that's a very serious question for all council members to think about, is how much in the funding approach, Groundworks Wales are looking for more funding than we'd originally anticipated. I guess the concern is that if on the model that they're providing, with the three things is largely what we're doing at the moment, I felt, looking around it, that it required a sort of step change in thinking. And I'm coming back to the point, one of the things that you mentioned, that I don't necessarily the two as being mutually inexclusive. I think you could continue with a degree of the education and provision that we're doing at the moment, but I think there is significant scope there for a step change in the financial model there as well. And I think going forwards that is going to have to be looked at, and effectively using the revenues from the one bit to subsidise the other, really. And what were your thoughts on that, and how could that be achieved without you know, this significant capital investment that we basically can't put into it?
So a lot in there, really. If I pick up the point about capital investment first, because I think that's absolutely right. I think one of the reasons for the original committee to look at other ways of trying to move the farm into a different set of arrangements was that, in theory at least, those arrangements could access capital that wouldn't be available to the council. Because, as you've quite rightly said, the council's policy decision is that there is no capital investment made available to other service areas other than the 21st Century Schools programme. That's the priority of capital investment. So this model doesn't resolve capital unless whoever operates the farm, and in the context that we're talking about it, that could be Groundwork Wales, unless they are able to bid for it or bring other resources in. And as you say, they have set out some initial thoughts, and they are just that. I mean, I think if Katie was here, she would say, yeah, there's an awful lot more work needed to do on all of this. But those initial thoughts are about saying we think there's more, they think there is more business in 2 or 3 particular areas that could help generate more resource, more income, some of which may then be able to be borrowed, you know, may be able to be put into some arrangement around capital. It's highly speculative, isn't it? I mean, I think, you know, if you were clear that this was your number one priority, and I'm not, you know, let me just come back to my terminology in a second, but if this was a priority service, then you would make your decisions accordingly, wouldn't you? You'd say it's a priority service like schools, and therefore we'll allocate our resources to invest in that priority service, which is what you've done with schools. And I think, you know, the reality is there is a set of rationing here that we're trying to break through by suggesting we can do things differently. How successful that's going to be or not, I don't know. I think that's a challenge for all of us. The other point I'd make is, just to be clear, when I was suggesting about the riding example that you referred to, I'm not suggesting that that's a realistic example. I was using that to illustrate the fact that actually, if you wanted to minimise cost of the farm, then you would have to accept that you wouldn't operate it in the way that it's being done now. Because we wouldn't operate a riding facility. We would say, actually, here's a block of land, 50 acres, somebody could go away and develop it. You know, we'd probably put it out to tender on that sort of basis. See, my point being, it's radically different because you want radically different things from it in that type of environment. If your objective was, we've got to nail the cost down to the last penny, but we want to protect the open space, that's the sort of thing that you would do, or could do. That was the point I was trying to make, Chair. Yeah.
Just have a quick supplement.
Yeah, go on.
Thank you, Chair, for permitting me to come in. You mentioned that this route is obviously a means of access to capital funding if it goes ahead. What became apparent when we visited the farm was that there is actually an association in existence already which is going for charitable status, which is the Friends of the Farm. So the question regarding the capital is, why would it be different in terms of accessing capital funding through a charitable trust? How would that be different from the charitable Friends of the Farm accessing capital funding?
Yeah. In principle, it isn't. In practice, it depends on the amount and the approach that funders take. So, for example, if Groundwork Wales, which is a fairly significant organisation with a strong track record of achieving bids for funding and with core funding from the Welsh Government, were to put in an application, and a small community group with, at the moment, very little track record of putting together a bid and managing a bid in quite the same way was to apply for the same thing, funders might look at that in a different way. So, in theory, you're absolutely right that they can both apply for many of the same funds. In practice, sometimes funders require organisations to be of a certain size and type or with a strong track record before they will invite them to bid. But in theory, you're absolutely right. So I think we've seen the Friends of the Farm doing, I'll invite Sally in a second, doing relatively small scale things and trying to put in place a different operating model to solve a bigger problem. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Thank you. We're probably going to jump around quite a bit with these questions and we'll be revisiting different bits. But Alan, I think you wanted to raise an issue.
Yes, please, Chair. It just relates to the first part rather than skipping around it, sticking to the vision mission issue. And from what you said, David, it appears to me that there's been no decision from the council yet in terms of what they want from the farm and what they want it to be going forward. That's the impression I've got. Maybe I've misheard what you said. And if so, should that not be the basis of where we start from? Because whichever way we looked at it over the next couple of years, it's going to cost the authority over £250,000, however you scale that, 2, 3, 4 years. So that's going to be sat there. Shouldn't we actually firstly decide what we want it to be before we move on with any of the models? And it appears to me that's been missing from the thinking.
I probably haven't been as clear as I should have been. I think the Resources Committee that looked at all of this and then the Shadow Board that was around and being sort of testing a few ideas against before we went to scrutiny. That scrutiny committee in November looked at a range of options. So there was information in there about actually, do you want the farm to operate largely as it is now? And I think that, without being explicit about, can you put a label on that? So the label I think we would put on that is a valuable community asset, because it does a lot of things for the community in all sorts of different ways. If we'd said, right, well, okay, members were attracted by another option about disposing of it, we see it as an open space asset for redevelopment, we'd have put that label on it. But I think the point I'm trying to say, Alan, is that this current set of proposals have been very much developed on the understanding that the farm produces a mixed bag of benefits, that when people have looked at them and discussed them with officers and visited the farm, they are content with that at a certain price. So at the moment, we seem to be kind of, I couldn't put a label on it other than it's an important community resource that the work so far suggests that the council has been happy to pay a level of subsidy for. But that clearly is, the central discussion. I think if you said to me, what is the farm? And that was the debate we had, wasn't it? What is the farm? I think the report says the farm is literally unique provision. You will not find another community farm like that, of that scale and size. I'm looking at Sally now, because you're also involved with the Federation. Do you want to just pick up that point about how unique it is?
So I'm going to pick it up just so much as echo it, really. So, I do actually sit as a trustee for the Federation of City Farms and Community Gardens, so I've had the pleasure of visiting a lot of different community growing projects and farms right across the UK, and it is fair to say, in the same way that Green Meadow is unique, that each of them are unique, although they fall under one umbrella. There's lots of different models, different setups, different sizes, different modes of operating. So I would completely echo what Dave said in terms of Green Meadow being a unique resource in the things that it offers, and it does offer a wide range of things to many different sectors of the community. We've got a range of different service users, as many of you will know from your visits when you've come around and seen it.
Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I do want to echo what I think is the importance of establishing what we think the farm is. I would find it a lot more palatable to say the farm is going to cost the council £300,000 a year if we knew that the farm was going to be a centre of excellence for education or for whatever it is. If it's going to be developed as a business, then I'd certainly like to see more of a pathway towards being weaned off council grants over the period. And then the farm could look at doing things like selling turkeys or fresh meat or whatever it is, or wherever it feels the market wants to take it, rather than what we think it should be doing. So my not frustration, but my gripe at the moment is that there seems to be a lack of direction in which way to take the farm, and who makes those decisions. Is that this group, is it yourself, or is it a combination of those things?
I think in terms of what's, go back to that point about what's the farm for, and you said about rather than where the market takes it, there is no market in that sense, because the farm already does a range of things that are marketable and are being marketed. So the farm will sell fresh meat, the farm will host a range of markets, the farm will run a range of training sessions for educational purposes, the farm will rent rooms out, the farm will run a cafe, the farm will do all of those things. The point is, isn't it, that each and every one of those, in your view, collectively now as a council, not individually, in your view, those are valuable enough when you add them together to pay a price for them. That's the market debate, isn't it? And all we're saying is, actually, you've also indicated you want to reduce that price. The best, if you wanted to, if that was your objective, if what's the farm for is for us to reduce the cost of operating the farm, but make sure that there is access to the 50 acres of land for people to wander around, or make sure that once a month there was a venue for a farmer's market. If you were that clear about what bits of the mission, the current operation that you wanted, we could come back with some very different options to the one we've got now. The option we've got now is about trying to protect all those benefits at a price that I think is, appears to be reasonable in the context of the council. But I totally take your point. If you wanted us to go away, one of the benefits of the exercise is that Green Groundwork Wales have suggested 3 areas of focus. Now, I think our view is, that they would do those 3 areas. They would be areas of focus, but they wouldn't be exclusively operating the farm on that basis. The farm would still do all the other things. And certainly our initial view is some of those things are not necessarily as lucrative as they could be. So I think that the point about a market is a really key thing, because we can't necessarily go where the market would take us, because there isn't a big enough market for any of those things if you wanted to reduce the costs much more. Yeah, other than, I come back fundamentally, because I do think it's a really important debate for you as members in particular. Fundamentally, you're facing a £16 million funding gap in your overall medium-term service and financial plan. I can sit here and we've got information about the benefits of the farm, how many people use it, what they feel about it, what benefits it produces in terms of educational attainment, how many activities are carried out down there, plus we've got for a range of services. And when we've played those out before, members feel, right, well, okay, those are benefits that we think we should still be buying at that price. If you need to, as a council, and you will know this better than me by the time you've been through all your budget decisions, if you need to, as a council, say, actually, we've got to take some really difficult decisions, then I think it's for you to be clear, not you personally, but you as a council to be clear about, do you know what, we can actually only afford to do this much, and therefore we'll accept that you won't do all these other things, and the mission for the farm then becomes focused on what you want at a particular price.
I'm going to bring you in now in a minute, Councillor Ashley, but can I just... we do recognise that there has been significant savings made over the last few years, and we appreciate that. I'll just bring Councillor Ashley in.
Yeah, we hear about markets, but at the end of the day, there was a council mission, and it was a 30-year-old council mission. That was there, and it's very similar to charitable mission, which is to educate, to do the environmental thing, and that was what for citizens of Cwmbran and the wider public. And it bolted on was a tourism mission. That actually is what the farm was there for. And I know you said about the vision. That is the vision. Whether you could capitalise on that in a business way, I don't know. But Dave was always clear, I think, when we came to the meetings, what we're there. We've actually managed to save there. But I think the previous people at the chair, and they had quite a clear vision about what that farm was there for. That's why they set it up. And to come say that it's not a clear vision, it was. I know we had this debate about whether it had a vision. The way in which we go forward, and I think Groundwork have reflected that in the stuff they put there. I think it's a bit hazy around the edges, and I'd like to see some more stuff there. But there's, to my mind, there's stuff there that we can work with and go forward. Now, what I am clear about, the previous scrutiny, and I know that Hugh's backed me up on this, that were very clear. They wanted to see the facility remain there, that it was, 50-year was what the previous scrutiny said, and an asset. Now, that how we manage that, how we get there to capitalise on things is the debate. And there are some interesting ideas here, and I think we're all sold on that. But there is clear vision about that staying in the community. And if you ask anybody in that community, there's a tremendous amount of love and passion for it, which is something you can't capitalise on. Or can, I don't know how to work it out. I'll leave it there.
Just to add to that, the impression I got from our pre-scrutiny was there was an appetite that we want to retain this community asset. I got a number of hands up. Councillor Connor first.
Yeah, I was going to make a similar point. There's almost a weight, I feel, on the scrutiny to say that we should head down a disposal route. And I think it's almost it was a pretty good idea to dispose of that early on and say, I can't speak for everybody, but there's not that appetite. At all. Anybody I speak to dispose of the site. The question we need to answer is how do we make it work financially and economically over the longer term, and what model do we need to put in place to do that. Following the meeting we had on the few days ago, the word I would take away from the site visit was potential, and we're all focusing at the moment on the cost of the council. What we're not looking at, or what we haven't looked at, is the top line. How do we bring in more revenue to offset some of that cost and start looking at it more economically than perhaps we have? And we can do that once we say we're going to focus on producing meat, we're going to focus on turning it into a tourist attraction. And once we've made that decision, then we can start looking at those top level production.
Councillor Connell, we're going to pick up on some of this as we go through. Councillor Thomas, and I know there's a number of you coming in. Councillor Thomas first.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm interested in asking Sally. I mean, obviously you're at the farm all the time. You're running the farm. What ideas have you got? Where would you like to see the farm go? Have you got a particular idea in mind? Is staff members there? Have you got a particular idea in which you think the farm should go? Or I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on this as well.
Okay, thank you. As has been mentioned, we've done quite a lot of work in recent years in terms of increasing the revenue, and that's been done by I think what's sort of been indicated here in terms of looking at what we're able to offer within our current parameters. So we did a bit of changing around of staffing, looking at what we delivered, changing packages, and that's been quite successful in terms of taking about £100,000 off of net spend, and we've maintained that consistently. I think other than what we're proposing as perhaps a stopgap or an arrangement going forward of putting prices up again, I think I would certainly say that within what we're trying to deliver currently, which on a personal level I would like to see us continue delivering, because I think there is a tremendous amount of value to a lot of different groups from that. But in terms of trying to continue delivering at that level, there's not a huge amount that I can see that we can do in terms of increasing that, and I don't think it's fair or sustainable just to continually look at putting up prices. That's not to say, I think potential was the word used down there, and I would agree there's still a tremendous amount of potential on the site. In order to capitalise, utilise, access some of that potential, I think we do need to source from somewhere a significant capital investment, and I think that capital investment, if used wisely, could be used to generate income from some scheme or another that could then subsidise some of the good work, the community work that we're doing. In terms of precisely what lots of suggestions, a very active and engaged staff team, lots of things we'd like to do. Some of the sort of big obvious ones off the top of my head, we've looked at developing the Dragon area into a splash pad. The Dragon's quite a feature of the farm. It's got history, it's recognised with local people, and splash pads are obviously something that's sort of very, very current, very attractive. We feel that would draw in additional people. Our adventure playground is close to the end of its life. We would look at replacing that and probably in a different location. We'd like to do a lot more marketing and promoting the use of our cafe to customers who aren't accessing the farm, and in an ideal word, in order to enhance that, we would look at capital investment in the actual facility, so the layout of our catering and making it appealing to people to come for a nice lunch out, whereas perhaps it's more aimed at the moment at those who are already on site. So I wouldn't say, you know, if you gave me a pot of money straight away, this is absolutely what I would spend it on and this is what we would achieve, but I would definitely say there are a number of ideas, and if we realistically had access to some funding, then we could easily come up with something that I think would be, you know, a very credible means of using it to good effect.
We're going to discuss procurement, financial aspects, income generation, next steps. So I'm going to call some members in a minute, but bear in mind that we've got quite a lot to get through, and some of the stuff we may be covering in a minute. But Councillor Davies, you want?
Thank you, Chair. Marketing. I've been a user of the community farm now for around 18 years, since my daughter was little. I had lots of fun there, using the adventure area and different things. I'm just wondering about, are we tagged in the correct markets? Because I've never seen any real publicity for the community farm. Are we tagged in the right areas to get people through the door? And also as well, you were saying about the users, are we excluding a lot of users by constantly raising the prices for entrance fees? Because I know it's not exactly the cheapest place to visit for a family, and I used to find that when my own daughter was little. So are we outpricing the area, well, the farm, for people to use it, and are we spoiling it and preventing people going there because of the price and lack of marketing?
Can I just bring Councillor Benton, then maybe we can answer what you want to speak?
Yes.
And then we can answer more than one question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Really, it was to pick up on the point that Councillor Ashley made. In the first scrutiny, if we were looking at this, and Dave mentioned this right at the top of the meeting as well, we're not here doing this because we want, in any way, shape or form, to really be having this discussion. In an ideal world, we would like to see this asset protected and continue to be funded by the council going forward. But you've said it's been driven by budgetary constraints and financial pressures. And if you were to look at this in a cold, purely financial sense, I made this point in the last council, it does not stand alone on its current model. Economically, as a farm, it's not self-supporting, it doesn't generate enough revenues to expand and grow the business if you were looking at it from a business sense. So we were tasked with then, well, what do? Do we sell it off, dispose of it and raise money for the council because there's land there and buildings? The general consensus amongst the scrutiny committee meeting was no. We having been and seen what a wonderful asset it is, we would like to preserve that and avoid that if at all possible. That is the last course of action, the least preferred course of action. The next course of action was, well, do you sell some of the asset, sell some of the little parcels of land to put that money back into the farm? It's clear that it does need, I feel, a step change. No disrespect to Sally, because the way that it's been going at the moment is that it's funded by the council as a community asset. It's not being run as a business, or not on a business model to make the profit. I think there's an awful lot of scope and potential there, but I think whether it's us or whether it's Groundwork Wales, we need to take a completely radical and fresh approach to looking at the running of the farm, and as this ties up with part of the visioning in terms of what we continue to provide with the educational side and the community side, and what is done more in a business sense to significantly bring up the level of income that we can get from it. Because this is ultimately, at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. That's what we're looking at here as members of the council. If we don't if we continue to put money into this, that money's got to be cut from somewhere else. And it is getting back to the financial aspect. And I'm sorry, it's the dirty word, but at the end of the day, this is what we've really got to look at on the farm if we want to keep it going.
Ask for a response to the specific that Giles raised and the broader question that Councillor... And then I'm going to bring in another councillor there.
Okay. So in the response to the comments made here, I think you raised a really valid point around pricing and people accessing, and that is kind of one of the balances that as the farm I think we're constantly trying to walk, because we're there for people to access, we want people to access. However, there's a pressure on us to generate income, so there is an admission fee, and I think it's an important consideration going forward if we do look at price rises, etc. We do tie into a lot of different schemes, so currently we're able to accept Tesco Days Out vouchers, we do Spice Time credits, so we're always looking at opportunities really to make the farm accessible to those who perhaps otherwise would be unable to access, and see if we can do favourable rates for community groups, etc. In order to enable that. In terms of marketing, we do work to a restricted marketing budget, so a lot of what we do advertising-wise tends to be no-cost, low-cost options. We make, I feel, extremely good use of social media, and I appreciate that there's a chunk of people who don't access social media, so that doesn't necessarily tap into them, but we do have a number of Facebook pages, one for the cafe, one for our Baby and Toddler Tuesday, and one for the farm as a whole. We've also got Twitter, we've got large numbers of followers, and that is amplified, retweeted, etc. via the corporate comms team as well. We don't do a lot of hard copy advertising, and as I say, that's largely financially driven. It is difficult to measure when you're placing hard copy publications the amount of response that you're getting from it. So we've tended, where we've used that kind of media, to include vouchers and things like that, so that we can get a measure, and then we'll re-advertise where we think we're getting the highest response. But it's interesting to get different people's views, and often if people say, I didn't know you were here, I've not seen you advertising, the question we'll ask them is actually, where would you like to see us advertise? Where's the publication, where should we be? And obviously we'll follow that, so we've open suggestions if you think there's places we should be where we're not, but certainly we try and get out as widely as we can on our limited budget, and we do also make use of the Toolvine Talks publication. There's very often reference to the farm within that.
Thank you. Thanks. In terms of the broader point, I think I'd go back to the piece of work that we did actually as it happened with Groundwork Wales at that point in time. So those of you who don't know, we first came across Groundwork Wales when there was a grant programme called Community Asset Transfer opened up by Welsh Government. Opened up by Lottery, I think, rather than Welsh Government, yeah. Under Community Asset Transfer, provided there was a change of ownership of the asset, whoever was applying to take the ownership of that asset could also apply to the lottery for capital investment, which is entirely the point of where you get the step change that you've talked about. So we worked with Groundwork Wales to say, and they were one of only 8 organisations that were successful in getting that type of funding. Because I think we all agreed at that point that actually there was a step change that was needed. One of the ways of bringing down the ongoing revenue costs of any business is to make sure you're investing regularly in it to keep it fresh and generate new sources of income and do the sorts of things that Sally's just talked about. And the community asset transfer funding was the opportunity to try and get to that step change, if you like. We didn't get that. Groundwork Wales were unsuccessful on our behalf about getting that funding. But my point is this, actually, and it's not referenced in this report, but it may well be part of the detailed conversations if we get that far with Groundwork Wales this time round. Under the community asset transfer, we talked about passing the freehold ownership of the farm to the new charity. And we talked about that, and I know there were different views in the shadow group about it. Certainly I was of the view that if your intent as a council at that point in time, if your intent as a council is to protect the farm for the next 50 years, actually it's probably safer vesting it in a charity than leaving it as a public sector asset. Because over the next 50 years, we'll be looking at every asset that the public sector has just to stand still, I'm sure. So we talked at that point in time about saying, if you wanted to, if your intent was to make the farm available for the next 50 years on broadly the same kind of offer that it is now, to try and deal with the capital investment issues, maybe you should consider not just giving a lease of the farm to the charity going forward, you may wish to consider giving the ability of that charity to have that asset and dispose of some of that asset itself, because the value of that disposal then, there's 2 different scenarios. If we sell the farm Your current policy as a council is that that goes back into the pot for, so any disposals are actually already prioritised for 21st century schools. That's your current policy as a council. So selling the farm doesn't benefit the farm under the current council policy. Transferring the ownership of the farm, if we were able to do that, and there are lots of ifs and buts, and we're nowhere near that stage of the discussions yet, but certainly we looked at it the first time round, would mean then that the ownership would transfer to an organisation whose sole purpose is to benefit the farm for the next 50 years. So if it needed to sell a little bit of land, that money then wouldn't go off and pay for the council to build new schools or mend roads. That money would then be available to that business to reinvest in developing whatever it was that it wanted to do to bring down its revenue costs. So, you know, there are opportunities for the type of step change that you've talked about, but they are much more complicated to get to. But they are still part of our, you know, I know the existing shadow board is very nervous about that. The council would be very nervous about that, I'm sure. But if your intent is to say, we need the best possible model to guarantee a future for the farm for the next 50 years, broadly doing the same things that we want now, and our intent is to try and bring down the revenue costs by making available capital investment, then that maybe needs to go back on the table if we can get that far.
I'd just like to know sort of the relationship of the out-of-area visitors that we get, because many a time I've passed and obviously there's these large coaches, but they're from out of area, they're not from our local community. So are we investing, obviously, the £300,000 a year? Is it going to our local community? What's the relationship of out-of-area visitors? And thanks for the tour. And we can see now it's obviously it's very dated and it does need a lot of cash inject. But would it be better to make it smaller so it's more manageable, so it doesn't cost so much to maintain, to keep and dispose of some of the land, or go the other? Can it be made? Why can't, instead of having 2 cows, have 50 cows? Why can't, instead of having 10 sheep, you know, you can bring more revenue, like you say, you know, the bees, everything is fantastic in its own little right, but it's very, very small. So this is small, that's small. You know, if you had a herd, would you get more to come back in that way? Because like I say, you've got the land, you've got the ground, but everything just seems to be on a very small scale. If it was, it's either got to go one way, it's either got to go from this big to this, so it's manageable, or you've got to be able to run the whole amount of the land you've got. It's got to be a successful business, really. I know it's a community investment, and it's great. I'm not saying it's not, but it's got to be run on a business plan. You can't just keep throwing money away, really. And I just think it needs to be maybe more commercialised, like you say, like, you know, like Folly Farm and Kevin Mabley. They make money, whereas now we, you know, have we got any options to go down that route to make it bigger, or, you know, if you think you make it smaller?
Before you answer, can I just say that we're going to discuss in detail income generation in a minute, so we'll pick up on the income generation then. The question I think needs answering at this stage is the out of area visit a bit, but we'll pick up, we'll park the income generation because we're going to have a wider discussion on that in a minute.
Farmers accessed by a wide number of different people from different areas. So across the piece and all the different services, it's usually sort of 65 to 70,000 people who are accessing each year. Those who are accessing on a regular basis and getting a lot of the perhaps longer term benefits do tend to be local people. So the vast majority of our yearly pass holders who will buy a pass for a year and can access as many times as they like are people who live locally. I don't have the exact breakdown of all the numbers, I'm afraid, but there's large numbers of those. We've also got some of the local community groups, so the Green Meadow and also the St Giles group, who access regularly, specifically as local groups, and they do that as part of their offer. There's not a charge to them for that. We do find that schools from both within Torvine and outside of Torvine will access, and some of that is influenced by transport costs. If you've got to hire a bus, whether you're going sort of 5 miles up the road, let's say it'd be too far for the children to walk, as opposed to doing a longer journey. So that we know does influence the decisions of some schools. So I don't know if that's a precise answer, I haven't got the exact figures, but there is a good mix. It's well used by local people, and a lot of those local people are people who are accessing more than just for an odd day out. If someone's perhaps just coming for a single day out, so using more the tourism element, then they're perhaps more likely to be people from further away. But people who've got a a relationship with us, if you like, who visit frequently, particularly perhaps for the baby and toddler Tuesdays, are more likely to be from the local area and within Torvine.
With regards to obviously the education of the school visits, and they were all charged locally.
Yeah, there's admission charges that apply to all schools.
So then that makes it does make it expensive. What if like, say, if you were to let them in for free, and then you'd have the income generation from the cafe and the shop, the gift shop, etc., would you get more super?
Very happy to look at different models. Obviously, the message I'm predominantly receiving is less about reducing charges and letting people in for free, much as we'd love to do that and allow them to use the facility. As far as schools go, they actually don't tend to have a very big impact on the cafe. If you've got a class of 30 children with one teacher, then they'll bring packed lunches, and they're very much focused on their educational activities. It's more parent-toddler groups, family groups that would make use of the cafe facilities.
We'll move on now to... we've discussed at length here that obviously we want to try and retain this unique asset, but we are also talking about a step change in terms of revenue raising, etc. So we'd like to look now at the procurement exercise and where we've got to with Groundwork Wales. Does anyone want to ask the first question on this, or shall I? I'll ask the first question then. The first question we had really were there other directions that could have been followed in relation to the procurement process, and was the coverage satisfactory? Now, the issue we had with this was you did an expression of interest effort, and there was it 5 people expressed an interest, and we came down to 1. But we were concerned a little that did we go out wide enough with this? Was it? I mean, the paper says that you've followed all the EU procurement rules, etc. But have we really captured who's out there that's interested?
So if I'll make some general comments on that, and then perhaps ask Stuart to fill in any detail on it, really. I also made the point in the report's also made the point that actually, unlike leisure services, where there's an established market, go back to that point about this is unique provision. So if you were tendering leisure services, there are any number of organisations now, so about 2 in 3 local authorities, probably more than that, have a trust of some kind or a private company of some kind running their leisure facilities. So there's a very wide range of organisations that you could potentially go to. What we did was take some advice about an expression of interest route that would enable any organisations of a particular size and style to apply for that. We promoted that, I think, as well. I think Stuart can fill in the detail in a second, but I think we made it clear that actually, because there is no national marketplace, we thought, well, actually, the most likely candidates are going to come from being one of 3 or 4 things. They're going to either be a member of the Federation, so we ensure that the Federation was made aware of it. They are likely to be a charity operating sort of within the Gwent region, or they are likely to be a charity of a particular type, maybe operating leisure facilities locally. So all of Gavo and TVA's contact list was circulated as well as then the open Sell to Wales advert. So I don't know whether you wanted to say more on that, Stuart.
No, to be honest, you have to just reiterating what you said, Dave. Really, we took advice from our procurement team and looked at the best way in which we could actually promote it. It really did come down to that, obviously, in terms of the time frame following the last screening committee. We wanted to see what the market was like. In terms of the procurement process, it was advised to us that this was the best element to go through. And again, we just advertised through Gavo, TVA, the Federation of Local Farms, and then obviously the Sell to Wales site that it went on to.
So why did I get 2 organisations, I'm not going to mention them, come to me and say they were missed?
I don't know.
They were in the community sector. They seem to have missed that sector because I've had that happen. As I said, I'm not going to make them miss because I was a bit, you didn't got the general community, and I think that was remiss. So I mean, you know who they are because they've contacted you. You've talked to them. But I will say afterwards, I've said who they were, and it just seemed it wasn't a wide enough procurement from what I could see. I'm saying that because we seem to have missed out a few. areas of interest. It's a critique on my part because they've actually come to me as chair and said that. And I did mention who they were.
Just to be clear, I haven't spoken to anybody in terms of...
This is in the general... They're people that are not necessarily sitting on TV and go, you know what?
Sorry, yes, there is, but let's be clear though. In Groundwork Wales is an environmental charity. We are running an environmentally based service. The organisation you're referring to isn't an environmentally based charity. It's a charity that does focus on entirely different field of work. So, sorry, I located the discussion then. It was a bit peripheral for me because actually I wouldn't expect that type of organisation, no, exactly, to be running the sort of facility that requires health and safety organisations that, you know, the sort of arrangements that are needed. So, but the point being that everything that Stuart's just said about the process, if they missed the opportunity, it wasn't because they would have been missed off a list. That process was well, as far as I'm aware, fully implemented.
The only reason I say that is that it could have gone out on the general category and might have caught them. That's only criticism. I think you did quite well, really, but it is a specialist area. I mean, you might have missed City Farms off had you gone out around here because City Farm would have been the general category. My only criticism that is procurement is peculiar. It is a specialist area, but you might have got that, bearing in mind that health organisations which we're talking about are looking at that. I've just come up with eco what's its name as a health category now, which I've never come across before. It's new.
Yeah, my question relates to the. Do you think it was premature to go to market, given we don't know what the farm is at the moment, we don't know what the vision is, we don't know what direction to take? Do you feel it was slightly premature to approach companies?
I don't think so, because the specification that we put out with the advert sets out what the farm currently does, and our brief, as has been discussed really, that came from the scrutiny committee, is actually we think we want to protect what the farm currently does. So I think my personal view, not.
But I think we're all in agreement that we don't want to go forward based on the current model, so we need a new model with new directions to take the farm forward effectively. So my personal view, going forward to the market, asking them to base their responses on something that has been done over the last 5 or 10 years isn't sustainable for the next 5 or 10 years.
The point being, though, I think as well, that in their response to the advert that set out what do we currently do, they were invited to sort of set out in that initial expression of interest any particular areas for development, which I think Groundwork Wales have done. And only if we get to the next stage of work would we then be saying, right, okay, let's have a look at that in a lot more detail about what does that mean for the farm's day-to-day operation, how does that translate into costs, where's the money, all of that stuff. So I think that the stage that we're at in terms of, just so that people are clear on this, the stage that we're at is very much a response, an initial response to that expression of interest. It is not actually, this is how the farm's going to operate. Now, there is a risk that we will not be able to complete that process. If Groundwork Wales, when they start to look at, and this is a public committee, we don't want to get into sort of negotiating the offer, if you like, in public, but there are a range of areas of costs that we think they can improve from our point of view. There are other costs that they feel actually they would struggle to match the council's performance on. So it's only when they put all that together in a very detailed way that I think we'll be able to say, actually, this is something that we can do. If we're unable to do that, then there's clearly an opportunity to go either back out to the marketplace eventually, to look at a whole range of other options, but I think, I have to come back to saying, if your intent is to try and protect the farm for the next 50 years, it would be the best way to do that, in my professional opinion, is to get that in the ownership of a charitable organisation with a track record in environmental management and service improvement. Can I just make one comment? I'm not sure it's the view of this committee, Councillor O'Connor. My feeling was that this committee wanted to maintain this community asset definitely for the long term. That was the feeling I got speaking to all the members. I agree that we want a model that's going to work in the future, but I didn't think there was any feeling of the committee that we weren't going to keep this as a community asset. So
Bring in Councillor Ashley.
Yeah, David, I think you did a valiant effort there, to be honest. And I'm kind of leading on from what you're saying now. What would you do differently in this? Because you obviously learnt quite a bit from this process.
Yeah, what would we do differently? I think we'd start earlier. We'd allow more time. I think we would. I think those are the things that we would do differently. It would be better, actually. It would have been easier, I think, if we had got and represented in the documentation, if we'd got a clear position. So we've had a set of discussions, haven't we, about a whole range of things, and we've interpreted that intent as being maintain the current basket of benefits that the farm produces that seek to reduce the costs. Maybe we needed to be a bit more extant about some of that. I don't know whether Stuart wants to comment, really.
Take the point the members here have said about, because I must admit I haven't thought too much about it, the visioning thing, that seems to be becoming quite an issue with this particular scrutiny. Is that something you would do?
No, I think if it's an issue, I think you need as members to ask us to set out what we think, and then you need to help frame that, because we've interpreted your discussions last time round as saying, actually, we don't want to dispose of the farm. We don't want to see the farm reduced to a particularly narrow field of work. We do want to retain the breadth of activity that the farm produces for the community and a range of other things. So that's what we've interpreted, and we've framed our approach on that. If there is a feeling in the committee that you need to be really clear about your vision, then you need to help us frame that vision, because I think it's quite difficult for us as officers to do that on your behalf. This is a political decision in the end. What you spend on the farm, what you get for the farm, is a political decision in the sense of, you can only spend that money once. The very clear understanding, and I think Councillor Hugh Bevan outlined it earlier on, was when you debated that as a committee, you were happy with that balance. If you're now saying actually you're not happy with that balance and you want to be clearer about a particular aspect of the farm's funding and you want to link that to a particular aspect of the farm's mission and you want to link that to a level of funding, that would be really helpful from our point of view.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions for Dave, but just to pick up on the point you made, Chair, when you said to the councillor down there at the end of the table about, we've not taken the view about the Torfaen retaining this as an asset. To be fair, we've not really discussed that. That could well be back on the table if this procurement exercise doesn't go through to its conclusion. That would be one of the things we would have to look at again. But to bring it back to the procurement, could you please give us a bit more information around why we've only got the one horse in the race at the moment, why the other tenders are not being taken forward, because that was a concern in itself in terms of the risk of this. If this is not, and I don't want to jinx it or anything, but there are demands that are being made on their side as well, which we hadn't factored into the original equation. There's certain contractual things in there that I would have concerns about. Now, you mentioned the transfer of the freehold. In the earlier committee meeting, the committee was very much of the view that Torfaen should retain the freehold in the event that the Leisure Trust went bust as a degree of measure of protection for Torfaen itself. Without getting too much into the nitty-gritty, but when you mentioned if they had the freehold, they could dispose of parcels of land themselves. Within the contract here, under this procurement exercise, they're asking for a 1, 5 and 10 year get out, basically, and that's a concern in itself. So there's two questions, really. One is about why we're only focusing on Groundwork Wales at the moment, and the other tenders have been discounted. There's a bit about the risks associated with this particular tender, and that then leads on to the contingency. What contingency work is being done should this not either be concluded in the time frame, or should this not go through to successful conclusion? We're back to square one then. So what contingency work is being done?
So in terms of procurement, let's go back there are no tenders for the farm, so we've put out an expression of interest, which invites a number of organisations, and I think there were 5 or 6 who responded, 6 who responded, 6 who expressed interest in looking at the documentation. Of those 6, only 1 responded, which is why we're in dialogue with Groundwork Wales. They were the only organisation of the 6 that said, actually, now we've looked at it, yeah, we think we could do something with it to shorthand the discussion. So there are no contractual arrangements with anybody at the moment, and you're quite right that that is a risk. There is risk that none of that will complete. That would be the same whether we had 3 people at this stage or 1. You know, at this stage of the process, we wouldn't be contracting. You're quite right to say that at the moment there are differences between what the initial expression of interest is saying they think they would be wanting and what we feel actually is probably on offer in terms of the amount of revenue funding and a range of other things. And that's the next stage of work, isn't it, that Stuart's going to be leading from my point of view about saying, OK, that's where you're starting your understanding of the farm's operations. You know, there's reference in there to tailoring the funding down. I think people mentioned earlier on about can we save money each year on year. That may well end up being certainly one of the intent at the moment, but it may be a point of negotiation. So there'll be a whole series of things that Groundwork Wales will be interested in looking at and saying we can do it, but we can only do it like that. From our point of view, we've got to evaluate all of those things, add up the bottom line and say, actually, that's probably not good enough, or actually, yeah, that sounds pretty good from our point of view in terms of the parameters we've got to. But none of that is a contractual process, and I think the report makes it clear that if it doesn't proceed past the initial stage of interest, then we've got to do other things. Hence, because we've got to save some money under the current council intent, we've got to do something that can be in place irrespective of the trust arrangements from April next year. So you're quite right, there is a risk. Could we mitigate that risk by having more people on the list? I'm not sure, under the current arrangements, how many more people would go on the list. 6 organisations said, yeah, we're interested in looking. Only 1 said, yeah, we want to come back and do some work with you.
I'm going to bring Alan in a minute. Can I just, and that was very helpful, the questions you raised there, in terms of answering what we're... Okay. You said we'd have to do something else if the Groundwork Wales option fails. Will there still be an option to go down the formal procurement route?
I think from our point of view, if Groundwork Wales were unable to complete that, then the first imperative about getting close to the amount of money that the council wants to use to operate the farm, we're saying we're almost there. Yeah, we're almost there. So we would continue, if Groundwork Wales fails, we would continue to operate the farm directly and then just take stock of, actually, is it useful to go through another procurement exercise on the same terms and conditions, yeah? Or is it more attractive to say, actually, yeah, we might want to make available aspects of the freehold, or we might want to say, actually, you know, rather than us prescribe the current service, which is what we've done, we've said this is what the farm does at the moment and we want to protect this and enhance that, we might say, actually, there's a farm there, give us some really good ideas and an expression of interest. And I think we'd go straight to a formal procurement. I think we would want expressions of interest about what, because this is unique, isn't it? It's not a question of we're out to tender on painting that wall and 10 people can do it, and actually we're going to award that tender on who's doing it the cheapest. It's a completely different scenario where we've got a very limited set of organisations and some fairly difficult and complex issues to resolve with them to see if we can do that in a way that works for both of us.
I'd like to move on in a moment to financial aspects. But Alan, have you got any more issues around the procurement?
Chair, that is actually come slightly onto procurement and the financial issues, because...
Can I part you just a sec?
Yeah.
Are you on the procurement only?
Very quickly, it just strikes me as we've gone through 2 of these scrutinies, and if we revisit this, whether it's through procurement again or whether it's straight out to tender, because we've gone through this exercise, people are going to be a darn sight more aware of this, aren't they? We've done the publicity, haven't we?
Yeah.
So actually, there's no excuse now. They should be aware of it.
And I'll bring you in because you said you're going to touch on the financial stuff as well.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in essence, in terms of procurement, the financial information that we've had is actually from last November now, or the paper before last November. We've had nothing updated in that. And I thought a number of the figures there were rather tenuous and that the deal was a little bit marginal. And therefore, I'm a little bit dubious about whether Groundwork Wales will find it sufficiently attractive to move forward. And given what they've said in their paper, where they're looking at a year one cost of, say, 341k, they don't drive a lot of money from the private sector. It was only 69k in 15-16. So they relied a lot on grants, and I guess those are probably a little bit tighter now. So I feel it's going to be difficult to move with that. But given, that might not happen, and we might have to procure again or do whatever, and that I think it's pretty unclear about what the real focus of the farm should be, even if it fits as it is now, fulfilling those functions. I just wonder whether or not we should be looking at a group of some kind, amalgam from somewhere, to start to look to drive this revenue forward and to look at what we can really do with it and what it should be, to really focus. We decided we want to keep the farm, community asset. I think everybody's probably agree with that, but it's how we do it. I think there's time to actually sit down and go back to the start and really look to say, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Because the cost is going to sit there for the council the next few years anyway, and it's been such a long time. I don't think another 6 months really analysed and doing that will hurt, because, for instance, you hear about a comment down there about reducing the cost to schools. No, whether that's a goer or not. But there are different ways to look at how we actually skin this particular cat, if I use an awful analogy when we talk about a farm that contains animals. but there are different ways to look now, and I think we've looked at cutting down the farm, but not how we can grow it.
Yeah.
And I think, Sally's trying to be everything to everybody, I think, in running this farm, and it's been inward looking instead of outward looking. I think maybe we should find some way of starting to look outward in terms of the community farm.
Can I respond?
Yes.
I wouldn't disagree with the sentiment. I mean, I'll let Sally talk, and I think Sally has talked at length, actually, Alan, around the extent of things that have changed at the farm over the last 6 years to bring costs down. And I think, when Sally was talking about what they do in marketing terms, for me, there's not a huge amount of difference between what Sally does in marketing terms and what, I don't know, just pick a name out of the woodwork, I don't know, Halo Leisure at Bridgend would do, for example. So I don't think, I don't disagree that we've always got to be very mindful of where are there opportunities to keep improving the efficiencies of things. But I'd have to say, well, I'll let Sally pick that up. Is there, do you feel then that actually there are things that we could have done that we haven't done to improve income down there?
I think this is something that we've looked at extensively, probably since I've been in post, but certainly particularly in recent years. And I've already referenced the management accounts, I think, where you can see that the costs are coming down. And we have largely achieved that by looking at increasing income rather than actually cutting costs. So I think we've got cost to a minimum in terms of the staffing levels that we need, the range of animals that we need in order to provide an attraction. And I think we're working to capacity really in terms of delivering activity. So I would say I think we've gone down the line of what you're suggesting. Not to say that we've necessarily got everything, there's always fresh pairs of eyes can come in and see different things, but certainly we followed that rationale in terms of looking at what we can deliver, the amount we can deliver, charges, etc.
I've just got Councillor Benny and then Alan.
Yeah, so
To be fair to Sally, we can see that in the report you've undertaken the exercise to cut the costs down wherever possible, and you're now having to look at income generation. But you mentioned earlier that's within the current constraints, and I think this is what my view was, and perhaps a number of other members of this committee was. We need a radical rethink to do away with those constraints and free you of them and try and give you a broader remit, really, to think outside the box and explore other possibilities. And to come back to Dave partly on what more Torvine might have been able to do to generate more income from the farm, well, yes, but it would have required capital expenditure. The dragon could have been repaired, the cafe could have been extended, the playground could have been refurbed and put back after the fire there. But the councillor colleague down the end there as well mentioned a point. and I felt this as well going around, that we're doing an awful lot of things, but not upscaling them to the extent where we are deriving economies of scale. I mean, selling the turkeys for Christmas to get income, fantastic idea, but there was probably about 25 or 30 turkeys. If you really wanted to make money by doing that, you probably should have 500-600 turkeys or more. You know, and with the cows as well, there's 2 cows to show the children the milking process, but it's not economically viable to get the milk pasteurised to turn it into cheese or products that we can sell in the shop or the cafe. So it's things like that want looking at. You say, well, do you just get rid of the cows and just show the kids a video of the cow being milked? I mean, the whole thing needs to be, I think, rethought.
I totally agree. I'm pleased you referenced it back to capital investment, because I think that is a key issue for us, isn't it? Has been, always will be, in the sense of keeping things fresh and new down there. And your other point around it isn't economically viable to do certain things. You know, if it comes back to the mission, isn't it? If the mission was solely around, we want this to be the best environmental educational asset in South East Wales, yeah, then we would probably not do things like sell a few turkeys on the side. You know, or certainly the 500 turkeys example is probably the wrong example, actually, but scaling up to that level probably brings other considerations that you know, are worthy of you comment on, I guess, aren't they? You know, in the sense that, you know, we've looked at the issue about, is it best to have one of everything? Is it better to have scale? You know, and there are fixed costs involved in all sorts of aspects of that, aren't there? Do you want to pick that up, Sal?
Before we're getting detailed in now, Councillor Bevan and Councillor Shepherd have raised income generation, but have we finished with procurement, Alan? Because you wanted to come back.
Yes, I just want to add a little bit. I didn't want to be disparaging about the work that we've done in marketing already, because it did move it forward by 100,000. But that's flatlined over the last 3 years pretty well, if you take inflation into account. And it's how you drive it on again up to that next plateau. And if you we spoke about the cafe, for instance. I don't think that cafe is a destination cafe when it could be. And we were talking yesterday, spoke about Sally's tea rooms at Secret Gardens. Yeah. But that is a destination lunch that people drive to just for a very simple lunch. And we could be that at the farm. That's only one, but I just think it just needs to look at a whole lot of other issues, because when, for instance, in terms of driving revenue, when we looked at hours within the paper, we looked at closing for days. And, you know, you've got some standing costs that sit there, so some of those others are marginal. However, we could do with some of those marginal savings, but don't think about days, think about hours. Because I see, for instance, we're closed at 5 o'clock still across the winter, last entry at 4, but it's dark at 4 o'clock, so I just wonder how many people will come there. Should we then make that 3 till 4, 2 till 4? Should we just open at weekends and close one day or something? Just to look at it in smaller elements to get some smaller incremental gains, and just to add all these different things up when you start to look at it holistically and look at everything, I think there's some revenue to be driven across that site. But I don't think that you can expect the farm and its personnel to do that on its own right now, because there are so many other things that they have to do there. Sorry, thank you, Chair.
The final point, it kind of ties in with procurement as well. You come full circle, you're back to the educational service provision and what that does. Well, if that's going to be the focus going forwards, then surely there shouldn't be money made available from the educational budgets to support it. If it's going to be envisaged as an educational facility, if it's going to be envisaged more as a community asset. Now, I've got to pick up on one or two points that Alan just made. A couple of us, after the tour, walked into the canteen area yesterday and had a look in the kitchens and spoke to the lady that was cooking. Fantastic facility there. Beautiful kitchens, all stainless steel, properly equipped. And the food smelled lovely. There wasn't a person in there, not a soul in the cafe. And as Alan was saying, if you're going to capitalise on things like that, you've got to. At the moment, it's being done, but it's not being well enough with the models I've got in mind. Somebody mentioned Folly Farm, but there are other things like Chepstow Garden Centre, for example. People go to look at plants, but I know people that will go there just to have a cup of tea and a piece of cake. And then when they get there, then they've got all these shops and stuff to spend more money in. That's the sort of thing that needs to be looked at.
The officers and
procurement. Sorry, the mic went off. If that's going to be the vision going forward, then that needs to be how it's sold to Groundwork Wales. And then they can say, well, perhaps they can argue for a bigger subsidy going forward for a longer period of time if we're going to maintain the focus on that educational service provision. We have to be clear, in the procurement process what this asset is going to be used for going forward.
Quite a few questions around income generation now, so I'll let the officers or Sally respond, and then I do want to touch back on one procurement issue because I don't want to lose something the committee wanted to ask.
I'll just make a general comment, then Sally can make any more detailed comments around it. I think you made reference, and we've used the term earlier on, haven't we, around, and you were drawing a comparison between a destination, a garden centre destination where people go and have a cup of coffee, and that's a phenomenon that we see. There are lots of places, aren't there, where people do that, you know, and I think it's just about, as you're quite right, trying to find the farm's place in that market. Now, we may not have got that right at the moment, but it's quite a crowded marketplace actually, you know, and people have to pay an admission fee, you know, so we have to think through these things, you know, in the sense that I think, and certainly Sally and I have a very different view on catering anyway, so yeah, there is more to be done, but I think I would like to try and disabuse the committee, if at all possible, that actually officers have been complacent about making small changes down there that add up to the very significant gains that the council has had from changing operation at the farm over the last 6 years. You know, it is difficult, I think, for us to find a place in the marketplace when that market is very ill-defined. And I take the point about, do we want to set a principal vision for it? That's for you to decide at the end of your scrutiny, really. I mean, from our point of view as officers, we were very clear about taking forward the farm's existing model and trying to improve it by asking somebody who's able to make a step change by bringing in capital investment, new ideas, new focus to do so, and try and contract with them in a way that reduces the farm's revenue consequences year on year. Whether that's possible in the end, I don't know.
In terms of income generation, I would certainly say it is an ambition of ours to have the cafe, our cafe kitchens, more of destination dining. And while we've been promoting that and we are getting a trickle of people coming in to use it, it's not something that we've yet sort of cracked. So I'd be interested in any ideas. I think people just view it as a facility for people who are using the farm, and it does obviously have the potential, as you've identified, to be a destination in its own right. In terms of the mix of agricultural animals, which have been mentioned, what we've got at the farm at the moment is a small number of a lot of different animals, which is what you will tend to find in an open farm setting, because it gives you a range then of animals for visitors to see, and it gives a range of different educational opportunities that we can show to children, whether it's egg collecting or talking about turkeys and meat production or doing milking. From a commercial point of view, if you were farming the land commercially, you wouldn't have those numbers of any of the animals. They don't stack up in a commercial sense. You would be looking at whatever you decide to look at, whether it's sheep, dairy, etc. So the animals that we've got is very much driven by what we're looking to deliver, and I think that the mix that we've got works for what we're looking to deliver in terms of education, community aspect, and as a visitor attraction. But I think, as Dave has probably said, that does very much tie into what we're saying the mission is and what we're looking to achieve. So we would seek to match to that.
I'm very mindful of the fact if we change from what we've got the shadow board at the moment, we've gone from something that's council and also the financial reporting mechanisms through to something that could be totally different. I think that I would welcome that personally, because I think we've got a different culture, haven't we? And I think that's where you're trying to drive this as well. Because at the moment we're in the council culture. I see that all the time with this. We've had 30 years of council culture in terms of policy development and also financial reporting, and I think this would free up. I'm seeing this all the time, and you're saying yes to this, and it's what's happened with the Leisure Trust as well. Alan, and getting capitalisation and making the decision process and the financial decision-making process, I would welcome that, because the policy driving the day-to-day running the whole thing, that needs to happen, because I think the process we've got at the moment, with the best will in the world, council's council, and the farm, if it was in the decision-making process more like a company or more like a charity, would a much faster process. And it reflects, I think, the way the place is. I make that statement because I've only been in the chairship a few months, since the last election. I've seen that last 6 years. I've sat there, and I have to say this because that is part of the problem in a way, isn't it?
I wouldn't use part of the problem. I would ask you to ask this question, isn't it? If we are where we are because of history, in the sense that 30 or 50 years ago, Cumbrian Newtown and the County Borough Council at that point in time decided on a particular approach for a particular piece of land, and some other benefits that it wanted at that point in time. If you were to ask yourself now, tell you what, we've got £250,000 and we want to establish whatever, a community farm, an environmental agency, whatever you wanted to focus it on, are we the best people to do it, you would ask yourself. And I think you would probably conclude maybe we're not, for all the reasons that we can't access capital investment. We have terms and conditions that are different. We have costs that are different. We are not in a place where we can apply for grants that other organisations can. We can't access some of the NNDR and VAT type benefits that a different type of organisation can. So you would probably conclude in that scenario, yes, if we want a farm, and we're very clear about why we want a farm, actually it's best to look for somebody who's constituted in that way to do that for us. And that's essentially where we're at the moment. We are trying to solve a problem that history has created, in the sense of we haven't got access to capital investment that's needed to reduce the revenue consequences. We can't change some of the operating costs because we're part of a bigger organisation. We can't access some of the savings that other types of organisations can. We can do a certain amount of creative thinking, planning and marketing, but that isn't our day job. We are not people who are, necessarily come from that world. So I think there are a whole range of considerations around how do we best take it forward? And I think what we've been trying to do is, try and walk that very tight balance between you want to save money, you want to keep it open, you want to focus on everything that you're currently doing. That's a fairly impossible scenario if you can't get capital investment and you can't change some of the other constraints.
And then I'm going to bring in Councillor O'Connell. You mentioned there about we council can't access grants. One of the questions on our list was, is it the option of the council pursuing EU grants ourselves, or does it have to be via charitable organisations? I just want to get that one out of the way.
I think it would depend entirely upon what type of grant. So when you, what I made a broad statement saying that we can't access grants. So if you take the example that when we were talking about making a step change, a particular type of grant was community asset transfer. Local authorities were specifically excluded from accessing that, which is why we worked with Groundwork Wales to try and get that on the table. So it does depend on what type of grant, but as a generality, when we've looked at other facilities, a bigger proportion of their income comes from grant funding than it does at Green Meadow, because we are inside the council and most of the other operators are outside of the council.
Thank you, Chair. We're onward income generation. I'm sure we will be in a minute, but I find that a difficult question to answer without understanding the primary driver. What's the farm's reason why? Where do we want to take it? Because that's going to drive where we focus our attention, where you would invest, and those areas that will drive income generation. If we're not going to go down a route of mass meat production, for example, as you alluded to in your answer, that almost forms 50% of the vision in terms of where we can take it. So that's a really good, positive thing that has come out of this discussion today. And the other point, I think you've hit the nail on the head several times, is in the shadow board makeup. You correctly identified that we've got council people in there who aren't necessarily experts in the field. And I think, certainly Stuart and I would be wise to look at the wider community and bringing in people who have experience in the sector, who have knowledge and ideas that they can drive to benefit the farm ultimately.
Couple of observations. I think that where you start the discussion about what's the vision and mission, I think is inherently linked in the current circumstances to how much do you want to spend. So if you said, actually, be clear about the vision of the farm, and what you want is the best environmental education facility available in South East Wales, we could look at changing things to deliver that, but it would may well cost you more because we wouldn't be generating income through things like meat sales and a whole range of other things. So it's a very circular discussion, isn't it? And I mean, in the current financial situation facing the farm, I think we've picked up the message loud and clear from the previous council administration that the members of that council wanted to reduce the costs of the farm, and that's been it. The question then has been how. We were saying you can do that in lots of different ways. You can close the farm, you can sell the farm, you can reduce the farm, you can change the ownership, or you can do a range of things. And in that debate, it came back to, well, actually, we still want everything that we're currently doing, but at a slightly cheaper cost. Well, this is the best way that we are trying to pursue that current strategy. Whether it will achieve that remains to be seen, doesn't it? Your second point about the Farm Shadow Board, I didn't comment on the Farm Shadow Board per se when I said it's a council mentality. I meant actually it's not in our DNA as officers in quite the same way as if your job is a sales agent within a commercial organisation, then that's your principal skill set. Our principal skill set is to ensure that the animal welfare is right, to ensure that the customer service is right, to ensure that actually the financial controls are in place, to ensure that the health and safety is all right, those kind of things, slightly different focus.
Gwyn next. I think it's becoming apparent there's two main issues here. One is the short-term thing, you've got to cut costs, which we're sort of trying to address, and then we're skirting around other things, but we're not looking at so I think the short-term thing costs. The long-term thing is, where do we want the farm to go in the next 5 or 10 years? So I think those two things really have got to go hand in hand together.
Well, I think we were clear from the last discussion that the members had on this, that they were seeking a solution that protected the farm as it is now, not necessarily in terms of its cost, but largely in terms of its offer for the next 50 years. So they were seeking to address the long term. And I go back to the point I made earlier on. In the next 50 years, it'll be unlikely, I think, that you won't be revisiting the discussion about, is there open space, is there assets that we can dispose? In the next 50 years, the public sector, for all sorts of reasons, will continue to face the sorts of challenges it's got now. So certainly we were very clear that actually the best way to protect the farm in the long term would be to ensure that it is owned and operated outside of the council. The Scrutiny Commission's view on that, Scrutiny Committee's view on that was nervous about ownership outside the council, but actually operation, pursue that, and that's the strategy that we currently do. So I think what we are trying to do is, and you're quite right, there are some short-term challenges, which are immense actually, but the longer term, committee were very clear about saying we want to see the farm around as a community asset for the next 50 years. What's the best way of achieving that? And we advised on that basis.
But on saying that, there's no hard and fast targets in there. There isn't something that says in 10 years' time we want to make sure that there's 100,000 visitors coming to that site. So there's nothing that, I don't think there's anything that people can actually visualise and potentially work a programme towards those outputs.
No, I think so. The fast target that's in there is the one that we've been set and concentrating on. It's just you don't want to spend more than £248,000 on the farm's operation. And we've engaged an organisation with experience of operating in the environmental sector to say, give us some initial thoughts about A, whether you can do that, and B, what you might want to concentrate on to do that, because we feel that within the council's direct operation, that's unlikely that we'll be able to save that amount of money.
Just a very quick thing on that. Dave, as this committee, we didn't come up with that figure. We have not debated what benefits we derive from the farm and how much the council is prepared to pay. That figure's come presumably from the executive, but we as a committee have not debated that and said how much we continue to support it. The point earlier that there's been was being made was we didn't feel that the two were mutually exclusive. We felt you could look at income generation and use that as a means of supporting the continued provision of the educational aspect to it and the community aspect to it. We felt that a lot more could be done to increase the revenue streams. As it is going, with this time frame and everything, it's very tight. You mentioned the contingency at the moment is that we would reduce the subsidy to the farm to this 248,000 figure, but the likelihood is we would still have it as an asset. The thing is, as it stands at the moment, it's a deteriorating asset because the stables need fixing, the dragon needs fixing, and the playground needs fixing. So it's not going to be as attractive a proposition even in 2 years from now, if things are left to carry on deteriorating as they are. And that's the concern in its own right. And when Stuart said, being council owned is part of the problem, it is, and that's because of the constraints within the council that we've got between capital and income and what money can be spent on what. The other constraints that we've got are with regards to the decision that's been taken previously that basically every penny of capital expenditure is going on 21st century schools programmes to the detriment of anything else in the borough that requires capital expenditure. I was hoping that that in itself might be under review when phase 1 was completed, and we were then asked to consider and debate phase 2 of the 21st century schools programme. But where was I going with this? I think I've summarised what I was going to say.
Thank you, Mr. Bevan. I'll bring you in now in a minute, Councillor. I want to go back to the short term and grow in Wales in a minute. So, because there's a lot of questions we haven't dealt with yet on that. But Councillor O'Connell, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just to follow up really on the previous answer. As we're discussing and picking up various points from different people, the three areas that I think we initially sort of thought about as a vision for the farm were in education. We looked at and discussed some mass production potential or keeping it as a tourist attraction. I think from what I'm picking up, the cost of keeping it as a pure educational facility is prohibitive to the council. So we could almost not discount it completely, but focus our attention elsewhere. We know that from Sally's experts' opinion that mass production isn't viable because we would need to invest millions in hen houses or whatever it was that we decided to do, which leaves us with tourist attraction. And I'm not seeing so far in this debate a reason to not kind of focus the farm's attention on being one of the best farming attractions in the South Wales area. And if we do debate further down the line that that's an attractive proposition, we could develop a vision statement around it and focus our attentions on funding opportunities, management models, organisational models to meet that vision effectively. So unless anybody has got a negative connotation on that kind of focus, that's my perception at the current time.
I'd like to come in, Chair, on a slightly different angle to that, but if we have these, because I think we must have the community bit then as well as the education bit, if we still decide the four that are there, have we actually looked at partnerships with people? Because if those four are valid, should we not be talking, for instance, to education? When we spoke earlier about the amount of funding they might put into it, an housing association in terms of community, and we have some local housing associations where they may put something into it, as well as our touristy bits, that we look at other participants who may put in. Because, for instance, if education says, and I'm going to point there, sorry, we're not putting anything into it, we can't do it, then maybe it is not an educational farm anymore. Because it's all very well to say we want it for education, but then say none of the money that goes to education is going towards providing that within the farm. And I think that it is pretty short-sighted on their part if they took that view, because I think it can be a superb educational tool, and maybe their money goes into providing it in a different way to paying a fee going in through the door, if you like, and whether we can look at something around that with some bigger contributors in bigger ways, in bigger partnerships as part of the solution.
That's a very good point you made, Alan, because the two voluntary organisations that said that, that we were talking about, one is in mental health and the other is in health and the horticulture, were saying if we weren't in the process, they would like to look at partnership. And they're doing that with other organisations, and it makes a lot of sense if Groundwork were leading on that to have this partnership. And you also took the whole of the health and well-being thing is another aspect of this farm. It's about, Alan has got a lot of experience in Leisure Trust on this again, how you generate projects into it, which can then generate income. It's such a thing, but it does come back to how we put that into this. It's a very big income generator, as far as I can see, away from other, tourism and as you rightfully brought the environment in, because there's a huge bit of that in there. I think we've got a big package in there. We did our walk round, and the health and well-being issues and the environment and the animals, they're all part of the same thing. Now, I would not want us to go away from education, but I think it has to be paid for in maybe a slightly different way. But that could be explored, but it has to have somebody like Groundwork driving it, which is not what we've had. And my discussion about the way we've done it in the council needs a different way of looking at it.
Can we just go back? Can we look at the shorter term now with Groundwork Wales and just go back to the government? In terms of Groundwork Wales, and obviously this is an awfully tight time frame now. You're talking about having it sorted by January, and we're in the middle of November. One of the issues was raised by members when we were discussing it on Monday. Have Groundwork Wales seen pension? This is getting into a lot of detail now, but I think we need to ask these sort of questions. Has Groundwork Wales seen the pension and TUPE figures? And if so, what work has been done in relation to this?
In terms of the information that Groundwork Wales have seen, they've seen the 2B information on the pension scheme. Obviously, from their point of view, as you mentioned earlier on, local authority pension schemes and contributions tend to be far higher than charitable organisations. As with everything, and in terms of the vision that they have put forward, is something that will be open for negotiations.
Yes, Chair. I'd like to know what those figures were, as we haven't seen them, because I was extremely worried about the 10.3 used in the previous paper, because I can't see it anywhere near 10.3, because since that was the lowest number with Grant Contributory Fund at that stage, and there's been a triennial valuation since then, and there'll be nowhere near that. I mean, I would say the funding probably in the region of 17-18% rather than the 10.3 used.
I mean, without getting into the detail, because we haven't got those figures with us, but they are around if people want them afterwards. There are significant issues on the whole pensions issue, aren't they, when you're looking at a transfer to an MPDO? One of the decisions that the council would have to take, and it would be part of the overall conversation that we're developing with Groundwork Wales, is would Torfaen County Borough Council, at the point of transfer, fund the historic liability? Yeah? Would we meet the one-off cost? Yeah? Because it's through... So we haven't had any debate on that, because we haven't got a firm proposal from Groundwork Wales based on a set of numbers that is specific to, they've seen the overall staffing establishment, they've seen the consequences associated with that. The detail of that particular part of the negotiations we haven't got to. In that, it will throw up all sorts of issues, I am sure.
Yeah, sorry, I know that you can actually guarantee previous liabilities. Given the state of pensions and where we are now, that might not be sufficient even, because you can move on from guaranteeing a sum from there and be in a far more parlous situation in a year or two's time. So that's a pretty tricky one right now, because of the state of the market. Nothing the council can do about that.
No, absolutely, and I think it's those things that this is something where you're quite right to say the devil will be in the detail. You haven't said that, but you're implying that actually we need to do a bit more work on pensions. And I'm saying absolutely. I think the paper's very clear about saying this could move from an initial expression to a detailed expression of interest, but to do so, there's an awful lot of work that Stuart will be doing with Casey Stevenson, which will pick up on exactly those issues about actually what is the liability for pensions, how we're guaranteeing, or how are the organisation that are taking the staff guaranteeing that they're able to offer a comparable, if not the same, pension scheme, because that would be important to us. You know, we wouldn't transfer on any other basis because that's not council policy. So we might get to the end of a very detailed piece of work, add up all the lines on it, and still say, actually, this doesn't work for us. But other than that, you know, I have to say, you know, there are marginal changes that we can make in terms of income, and you know, we talked earlier on about opening hours and stuff. We did an exercise that looked at quite a significant change to opening hours, but actually the net consequence of that is quite small. So, you know, certainly it's our view that, yeah, there will always be efficiency issues that we can get at, but they probably don't, even if there were 10 efficiency issues, they probably wouldn't add up to the size of change that is needed, and they wouldn't help move the farm forward in terms of stability. Come back to your point, Councillor Bevan, about the figures. I'll get a note put together about the genesis of the figures, if you like, the heritage of the figures, because I think it relates to the fact that, just to remind people, we had one-off funding put in because we were trying to pursue this so that it would be available from, so that the new model would be available from April. So the figures going forward assume that we've made that change and that funding comes out. Now, again, whether that's possible by the time we've added up all the lines, you know, when Groundwork Wales have done their more detailed piece of work and we've done diligence on that, whether all that works or not is the next stage of work for us, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, raised to your point about timing and you know, the pressure on timescales. Is there not a greater pressure even right now because GLL currently doesn't have a financial person, or your top financial person?
Yeah, I mean, that has been an issue for us. I know that Groundwork Wales, without getting into the detail in a committee, have brought in additional specialist resource that we've engaged with, and I think we've been very impressed with, actually. Yep. So they've resolved that problem, yeah, hopefully that'll enable us to take forward more detailed conversations.
Chair, I would have really liked to have seen a commitment secured that from Groundwork Wales that they were going to make an investment to reinstate the three bits that we've seen require urgent remedial action: the playground, the dragon, and the stable block, in particular for putting the animals in isolation when they arrive on the farm. You know, I would like to see them go beyond that even, because the legislation from Welsh Government is sort of long-term sustainability. And as you mentioned, that's another factor, non-financial, that's got to be entered into the equation in terms of service provision going forward for the next 50 years. Future Generations Act and sustainability, I think, should enter into the equation as well. But I would like to have seen a commitment from Groundworks Wales to not just make good on the assets that are there, but for significant capital investment going forwards.
Yes, my comment would be, to be fair to Groundwork Wales, when, for example, the only vaguely comparable situation we've been through was with the transfer to the Leisure Trust. Now the council then significantly stepped up in that set of circumstances to improve the quality of some of the asset for the Leisure Trust to operate. Now maybe that needs, you know, but under your current constraints, that's not an option for us. I think it would be a little bit unfair to say to Groundwork Wales, actually, we want you to operate this much more cheaply than we do, and we want you to finance all the improvements, because I just don't think there's that margin of improvement there. You know, it goes back to what we were saying, really. There are a few marginal things that you can change, but the significant changes have probably all been taken, unless, of course, you then start to look at different strategies, and your point about step change, and dispose of parts of the site in order to reinvest in the same. You know.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily just be about disposal of some of the site, because, as you said, the second it goes down to a charitable trust route, it then immediately opens the door to access to grant funding, which we cannot get at the moment. So there's opportunities, just significant opportunities deriving from the fact that they can then apply for grant funding for capital expenditure. But I do think it's a good point that Alan made earlier as well, in terms of partnership and sponsorship possibilities. And if we don't see this bid, excuse my terminology around that. But if we don't see this process coming to a successful conclusion with Groundworks Wales, then certainly I think then we should be exploring possibilities of working in partnership with other organisations, whether that's possible, or indeed, trying to get a sponsorship.
Councillor Bevan, I think some of those issues about we can make recommendations as part of the scrutiny committee, whether and the response we get, we'll have to wait and see, but we'll pick that up. We can have a little discussion after the officer leave about what we want to take forward as recommendations. Okay. But Ashley, then.
One of the things I wasn't clear, Dave, you maybe can inform me on this, if we go down the line of having some, obviously, Groundwork Wales, do they have the power under the current leasing suggestion to actually sublet some of the site to other organisations for commercial, semi-commercial? I wonder, because there have been some quite good suggestions made from people on that. Well, obviously the cafe is one of them, a potential commercial operation at the front of it, because it's actually quite you could sublet some of that without selling off. It does actually strike various people that I've heard make suggestions online to potential shops, garden centres, the rest of it at the front there. It would be a way of turning income. I've had several people making that suggestion recently. There are models around for community garden centres and the like in various places.
I think we would be keen to, if Groundwork Wales are keen to work with us and we can make the numbers work, which is clearly going to be the bottom line here, it would be in everybody's interest, wouldn't it, for us to suggest that there's a set of circumstances in which that's entirely possible.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we, I guess, is the question. I'm saying we'd have to think about how it's phrased and council regulations and things in there. But as a principle, we all want the same thing here, don't we? We all want the farm to be a success and reduce the cost to the council and have a long-term future. That seems to be the things that we're trying to achieve. Those three things are incredibly difficult to balance out. We've got a strategy which gets us close to that. It will be for others. Groundwork Wales, although they're a charity, have to balance their books. This will be a commercial decision for them. If they can't see the opportunities being realised, they can't see actually that there are opportunities to either get grant or change the way in which the asset is used, then they won't be then they won't be completing the process, because why would they? They've got to get their resource from somewhere, haven't they? They've got to be, making a slight return on this to enable them to justify it to their existing operation.
I must admit, on that part, it would have to be sympathetic. Obviously, garden centres, that sort of thing, or farmers' markets that have been mentioned in the past, are obvious things that don't work. But it does seem potential for doing that sort of thing is obvious.
Final one from you, Chair. How well would this sit within the business of Groundwork Wales in terms of what they do already? Is there, we're talking about savings. You either get them for economies of scale or synergies if you're bringing two different organisations together. What degree of synergies are there and benefits to be derived from what Groundworks Wales are already doing as part of their portfolio?
I think they are, go back to what we said earlier on, the farm's unique, so they're certainly not operating a similar facility already. Nobody is. There are some aspects of what we would ask them to be doing down there that they already are quite strong at. So, for example, a lot of what you talked about about making sure there's some really strong community engagement, some projects that are perhaps focused on particular client groups. They've got a very strong record in that regard, I think. They have a whole range of sort of cost centres within their operation. They'll be making those commercial judgments and coming forward with ideas, I think, Councillor Bevan. So difficult for us to say at this stage of the process. A lot's going to depend on, when they start to get out their magnifying glass and go through the costs and understand what feeds what line of cost and what they think they can change around that and make the judgments about, we'd do that differently, we'll do that differently, is that going to be okay? And they come to the conclusion around, actually we can make this work, then part of that will be around we've already got a group management structure, we've already got an insurance arrangement, or we've already got a procurement arrangement that can offset some of these things. So some of those things they'll be able to do cheaper than us. On others, I know they've expressed the review that actually they may not be able to do them as cheaply as we can. Insurance is one example. So it's got to be a very detailed exercise that comes up with that answer, I think.
And move on to the final part of our questions now, which is just making absolutely sure, have we done enough on income generation? I think we have given it a good airing. Yeah? Okay. In terms of next steps, a couple of specifics and then some general ones. What was the outcome of the request for financial contributions from the community councils?
What words can I use? Not terribly productive is probably the way I think we can put that. And I think that goes back to the point earlier on. You know, somebody was saying, well, we need to look at partnership arrangements. A natural one for me, if we're operating a community facility in Torvine, is the community councils. You know, but they are sovereign organisations. They have the right to choose what they do, and that's absolutely fine. So it wasn't terribly productive.
Put my mic on, I should set an example. In terms of Groundwork Mail's commitment to the local community, will they consider board members from the local community? Do we know?
We haven't. I think in the report we talk about governance arrangements needing to be one of the areas that we develop in more detail. Absolutely, we would want to ensure that the representation on that board, and there are examples in the Leisure Trust and elsewhere, is appropriate to the business that you're running. So some of that will come from the local community, some of that will come from specialist areas like, you know, marketing, HR and whatever, I'm sure.
One question we had on our list was around the Friends of Green Meadow Farm, and that question's already been dealt with earlier on about whether they could raise funds for the farm. We've already discussed that. We've covered a lot of ground today, and we've gone through most of our questions. Are there any burning issues members would like to ask while we've got the officers and Sally present? Councillor Shepherd?
I feel like this is an impossible situation we're in, because it can't continue. No, just being honest, it can't continue as it is. You can't keep obviously throwing all this money away. It's getting worse and worse and worse every year. And you expected someone else to take it over for less amount of money without injecting anything in the beginning. So you're still in the same place. There's no money to make it any better. Even though if you did have this capital injection, we're talking like you need about £800,000 just to get it somewhere reasonable to bring people in. I just don't think you can go on as it is. There's got to be a massive change. I think personally, it should be a commercially, and it should be a commercial business and not.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right in the sense that it's a very difficult set of circumstances to try and balance out. If we are unable to conclude with Groundwork Wales, there may well be an option about going back to the market and saying, here's an asset, tell us what you can do with it, in the type of thing, rather than say, I mean, we've certainly formed the view that a non-profit distributing organisation is the right kind of ethos so far, but that, may not be the way in which we're able to conclude this. So I think, those opportunities about saying, we'll have to have another look and another rethink, I think, it's still going to be around. Still going to be around, I'm sure.
Chair, we've talked a lot about setting the vision for the future and the direction the farm should be heading towards. Who's going to set that vision and by when?
Well, I think that's part of your discussions as a scrutiny committee. We will continue to operate on the assumption that that the council wants to continue to provide the full range of benefits from the current type of operation, that it is happy to do that at around the sorts of figures that are in the report. If as part of your deliberations as a scrutiny committee you think actually you need a much more focused vision for the farm, then my advice is, well, I think you as a scrutiny committee need to find a mechanism for doing that and advising the exec member, but you will have to do it. I don't think you can do half of the equation for the point that was made. Actually you've got to, these things they don't stand alone from each other, do they? If we had capital investment, we could reduce the revenue consequences. If we could reduce the revenue consequences, we could be clearer about what's the best area of business to be in, type of thing. There are relationships between those three parts. So if you want to form a view that that we as officers need to change tactic and concentrate more on a particular part, then I think you need to be equally clear about the financial expectations that you put behind that as well.
Any further questions from Councillor Baird?
Just on that point and picking up on your response there, could we not say that if we not at a certain point in deliberations or due diligence or whatever, then perhaps we look at the possibility of bringing in an external consultant? Would there be money available for that, to look at the merit in the various different options that you've just outlined there?
I suppose two points really, isn't it? I mean, with the exec members currently of the view that, transfer, if we can't transfer, then the council should continue to operate directly in the short term and then continue to explore other options for transfer. So absolutely. In terms of consultancy, I think at the point at which the Leisure Trust was being looked at, we asked the consultant who looked at the Leisure Trust and advised the Trust on their business planning to look at the farm. There was not an awful lot that came out of that hadn't already been implemented, I don't think. We've instructed and reported back on the work that Burton Knowles, who are a commercial estate agency who deal with assets, did, and that went to committee last time round. And so there was the obvious things about disposing of the asset, but then they also commented on different operational models. They concluded that this type of model was the same one. So I'm happy to think about, and no doubt the exec member will want to be clear about, are there other areas to explore? But I don't know whether you wanted to comment further, Sally. I mean, we've not been short of studies at the farm, have we? I think the issue is it is unique, yeah, go on.
I don't know if there's really a huge amount that I would add to that. There have, as Dave has alluded, been different consultants who've looked over the years. I think a lot of it, again, ties back into what you've already been talking about the mission and the vision, because obviously a consultant is going to look at what you ask them to look at. So the question is, are you asking them to look at the business as is, which has been done, or are you actually saying, well, we're thinking of a change of vision, look at this, in which case you might initially want feedback from officers as to how we would tackle that change of vision before or alongside looking for external views.
Yes, somebody just reminded me of something, thank you. The 106 money and the SIF money that might be coming into Cumbrae, because we're probably in the places like to have it, has been loosely referred to as a leisure facility, which we are. Is there a possibility we use it while we're still in the council, or not in the council, the possibility of building those buildings? It seems obvious. I don't know where you even think of asking that question.
I'm a little out of date with exactly what the council's policy is on Section 106 and the SIL, which is the Community Infrastructure Levy. I know the principles involved in both of those. My observation would be Section 106 funding for specific developments is there usually to address issues relating to that particular development and provide facilities that arise from that. So that may not be the case. And equally, we've used a lot of 106, or we've used an amount of 106 money in the mix for schools redevelopment and other programmes. So I don't know, I'd need to take some advice on that. But I think the whole thing about capital investment is, certainly the constraints are there, whether that is council capital investment, prudential borrowing, Section 106 money, which is often used in different ways for different reasons, and the infrastructure levy. I'm not clear. This is my own gap in knowledge, actually. I'm not absolutely certain what the council's policy position is, but my understanding is that the SIL, the nature of what the SIL gets spent on, are decisions that you as members take rather than us as officers. So,
I only say that because I think you've had some already, haven't you?
Section 106.
Yeah. And it would be rather attractive, I suspect, the private developers to build up some of the buildings we've got. It's an obvious thing to ask. And they've been putting it into parks and leisure buildings, which is sort of similar, building private parks. And just striking, looking at what we were looking at the other day, it makes obvious questions, doesn't it, David?
In terms of Section 106, we'll find out, but it stands alone from everything else, doesn't it? We wouldn't need to Yeah, you know, what I'm trying to say is, if you as members wanted to direct Section 106 monies to the farm instead of to the school, that's a decision that could be enacted whether we were operating the farm or Groundwork Wales were operating the farm. So in some senses, it stands alone from that, but it's something that we will find out a little bit more about.
Just coming on a general point on that. I'm not sure where we are with CIL. I know that the previous members, prior to the last lot of the local government elections, voted in favour to adopt it. The only neighbouring authority that didn't, I think, was Blaenau Gwent, so I think Newport and Monmouthshire did. I understood it had gone back to the Welsh Government. I don't know how far down the line they are with that. However, when I attended the briefing that was given to us internally in a members' seminar with regards to the community infrastructure levy, we were told that the monies raised, percentage of it would be given back to the community councils, and also the money that was left in Torvine's accounts would and could only be spent on new infrastructure projects. So if that's going to be the case going forwards, it wouldn't assist us in having the stable block knocked down and rebuilt. But perhaps it might if you were having something brand new built on another bit of the farm. But it had to be new, not doing up, I don't think so.
I didn't have my mic on. Housing development written all over it if the council have their way. This has to be self-sufficient, cannot justify the amount the council donates when it could be spent elsewhere. My daughter and I love Toddlers Tuesday, and we've been to a few other activities other than Toddler Tuesday and had a great time. Yes, they need to look at other revenue streams and build on what's there because they have a little diamond here. I mean, there's a mixed comments, and it's very similar to the types of comments that we as a committee have expressed. So I'd like to put on record, as we're on webcam, my thank you to the members of the public for their valuable comments. And they will be circulated so you can all have a look at them. That's the end of the questioning phase of this meeting now, so I'd like to thank the officers and Sally for their valuable contribution today. And this is an extremely difficult topic to discuss and come up with solutions, and I'm not saying we will, but we're doing our best. So thank you for your meeting, for attending today. We will remain now to discuss recommendations. Yeah. Thank you very much. If you can have a quick break for 2 minutes if you like. I'm just letting go of the loop.
This is frozen, so I'll do the rest on mine.
Right, we'll recommence the meeting now. I'll just remind all members that we have these key questions that we wanted to ask, and we should consider them when coming up with the recommendations. Now, the key questions were, as the suggested scrutiny activity, were: are members satisfied with the progress and diligence exercised in pursuing the agreed strategy? Do members consider that the agreed strategy remains valid? And are members content with the proposed next steps and the wider implications? So I think we use that as a frame to come up with the recommendations that we're going to put forward. So can I invite you to come up with thoughts in terms of formulating recommendations?
Yeah. The questions reference an agreed strategy. What is that agreed strategy?
So we jump straight to question 2, have we?
The first one references, I think.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Any other? Do you want to just repeat the question, please?
So the question was, I think all 3 questions reference an agreed strategy. I'm not particularly clear on what that agreed strategy is, so if it could be drawn out in conversation or pulled out of a report, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
My understanding is the strategy is what was agreed in resources last November, was that you go down the route or they go down the route of looking into the NPDO. So that's what they have done, and it's whether you still agree as a committee that they carry on down that route until they get to January or whenever Groundwork Wales say they can or cannot go any further with it.
Stuart?
Well, we are in that process, so unless we want to dump it out, we're stuck with it. I mean, we can dump it out if we want to, if we think it's satisfactory, but that's quite in the middle. We're going to put egg on the face of those officers doing that.
Alan?
Is it not the case that we can follow what we are doing? I mean, progress has been very slow anyway, and very little to date, and we're not even at the starting gate really of what the numbers look like. They're just some expressions of interest, a paper from GLL, and we are where we are. Is it not the point that we let that process continue, but should we not begin, or I don't know who that is, who the we is, to really re-look at what this is in total? What is the purpose of the farm? What is the purpose of the farm for the future? Where are we going? And what is that vision and mission? And it probably falls out what TCBC prepared to pay for that, if anything, but shouldn't that work be coterminous with the work that's going on GLL? Because I just feel that nobody knows what it's really about, what it's really meant to do, what the focus is and what the direction is, and I think it just needs a new strategic outlook on this, and maybe that does answer the strategy remains valid. I think we continue with it, but re-look at that strategy.
My personal view is that we carry on. It's only 6 weeks and it's January. We're going to know, what's going to happen with Groundwork Wales. So I do think it's worthwhile that piece of work is completed. Although it's been delayed, I think it's important that's completed. And I take on board your point, Alan. These are the wider questions.
The other thing that I've been... Sorry, Hugh, did I come before you?
Sorry, Hugh?
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, sorry about that, Hugh.
I think. Sorry, I thought I pressed the button. I think we should note concerns that were expressed by some members of the committee, Chair. Some members of the committee had concerns over where it was advertised and publicised in terms of if we're talking about the process that's been utilised up until now. I think we should also have a concern that there is only one party that's in the run-in, and concerns over we know that there's been reasons for delay in provision of information to us. I think that should be a concern. When I said to Dave about the risks associated, he said, well, there'd be risks associated if there were 3 parties running. It's true, but if one of the 3 withdrew and we still had 2 other parties interested, Do you see what I mean? That risk is lower than if we're dependent solely on seeing things to conclusion with one party. So in terms of where we are now with the process, do we want to proceed with the due diligence and what have you going forward to take it to the next step? Yes, we do. Yes, I think we do. I think we want to take it to the conclusion. I would also like to say, though, that I do have a concern that if we are unable to reach agreement, because at the moment they're there and we're here in terms of numbers and stuff, whether it's staff pension costs or amount of money they want year on year and for how long, and even things about the freehold and things like that. So there's a lot of negotiating that's got to be done to see this to come to a logical conclusion. I do have a concern that in next February, March, we could be meeting again as a committee and we could be back to square one completely, where we have to decide whether we then need to consider disposal of the asset, partial disposal, or completely different strategy, what we're going to do. But a lot of that hinges on what members have said today in terms of what is the strategic vision, what is the mission going to be going forwards.
And we've got that.
Yeah, the point, following on from what Hugh has said, we need to have a very accurate pricing, funding of how much the staff cost, how much the asset cost to run, because you said that it's out of date. And
He did offer, Alan, in response to one of your questions, he's going to send us some, did he say generic pricing?
No, can you come back pensions and 2p?
Come back to this, because one of my frustrations, and other people didn't get this either, I wanted accurate costings of that. I don't get it. So one of the things I was alluding to there is, this is the problem. If you have a voluntary organisation and you run a business, you can get a cost centre. You probably get this where you are. You get, because of the council system, it's very difficult to get something that features the farm and not the CEC's central establishment cost and all the rest of it. What we need is actually an accurate cost of what that farm costs to run.
Which is what the Ground Wales are asking for in terms of their financial due diligence.
We need to ask for it, because I'm going to get lumbered with it on the shadow board as well, and I can see me sat there, and I support them.
I just wonder, Chair, whether we recommend that a seminar be held on this particular topic to actually decide as a council where you want to take it forward.
A seminar is normally, from my, and correct me if the more experienced councillors around the table, seminars are just for information only. So a seminar wouldn't be the right vehicle for decision making.
Because I've got to sit there.
Well, if that is the case, perhaps it's how we can find another body that takes this forward to relook at what the strategy is.
Councillor Collins, next. Councillor Beck.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'm wondering if, in answer to the question, that the strategy is correct, but the execution of that strategy has been flawed in the fact that we've only got one response back.
I think that's right.
I think that's where we are. But I also think, as a group, it's worth us putting out the message to the community that we want to keep the farm open. We want to, keep it as a community asset and alleviate the pressure, certainly for the people who volunteer and work there, and lift this shadow of closure from this board. I think that would be a worthwhile effort.
Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. You're right. Seminars are normally for executive members or portfolio exec members to give briefings and provide information to backbench members. We do have a mechanism, though, and you guys have already been involved in it, which is the workshop, which is different from the seminar and is different from full council, where everything can be debated and it's a very relatively new thing in Torfaen, but we've had two very successful ones already. One on budget and one more recently. So I wanted to say that there is a mechanism, but the question I was going to ask is, and it touches on job security and people being concerned over futures and what have you. To what extent has there been any trade union involvement? I think that should be in the recommendations going forward, Kath. That we should bring the unions in as well.
Thanks, Chair. I think it comes, for me, it's coming back to the very first question we asked Dave. How badly does Torfaen Council want the community farm? And it's clear that it's a massive jewel in our community. And I think if that's the case, then we should be really going all out, looking for monies from wherever we can get it from, to keep it going exactly the way we want it as a community. I think no matter which way you go, even with groundworks, you're going to come back to the same problems. Like what my colleague was saying, you're still going to be tossing them with where we're going to get money from. I feel that we need to know as a council, how bad do we want it? And I think it's fairly clear from members of the public. This is a place that is a jewel, and we need to sort it out.
No, let me come back just in response to this. It's echoing what you said, Councillor O'Connell. I think it's a great point to make. The council, we want to keep this asset. I mean, how we run it and how we deal with it is the questions we're asking. And in terms of, we've got people working there with this cloud, as you made, Councillor O'Connell. I think we ought to make that recommendation on number one, that we want to keep this asset, and then the other things will flow from it. But the point about how much it will cost, they've legitimate questions we've got to raise.
Can I just make the point that it was, and I know this wasn't popular, it was in the previous leader's portfolio, and it was there for a reason. Nobody ever questioned that point. But now it's not there, and it's in a different portfolio. I think this is why this question has arisen. And it's hit me quite markedly, that, because, I'm only the chair of the Shadow Board, because I'm sure do it really, but and just remember there's 30 years of history on this, and it's interesting nobody's actually asked that question before. I find that quite remarkable.
I did a discussion with the executive member, and he was clear to me that he felt this asset should be retained.
You said so.
No, I mean, and the paper itself says it should not be closed or disposed of. So I mean, no. So my understanding is this. There's no ambiguity in terms of what the executive member wants, but there's a huge raft of issues that we've discussed today, and we need to feed these in as recommendations, and we're getting this, I think. Can we let's just concentrate again. So do members consider that the agreed strategy remains valid? Are there any other points on that? And then what about this question? Are members content with the proposed next steps and the wider implications? Now, we had a lot of discussions, and we've just said we want this to see as something's going to happen by January. We want to see that concluded. But the wider next steps, we had lots of discussions about what if, because it's a big risk. What if the Groundwork Wales decide that no? So we can ask some questions. I think we said, shall we go out to a wider procurement? Those sort of questions do we want to raise? I'm just trying to tease out what we want to ask.
I think, Chair, desire to retain this asset, if at all possible. It's also clear for a number of reasons. One, financial budgetary pressures, and two, the current economic model at the farm is not working to sustain it and stand it alone in its own right. Never mind stand it on its own in its own right, but to get it into a position whereby it can generate more income to reduce, because ultimately this is the end goal, to reduce the subsidy that it's receiving from Torfaen year on year. I think you're right about the timeframes, that if it's not concluded by early next year, certainly end of quarter 1, we need to be looking at a whole manner of different discussions as a committee to make further recommendations to the exec, and that may have to include disposal or partial disposal, because if this doesn't work, we're back to square one again, and then looking at possibly, things that haven't been explored up until now. I know Sally said they'd had a consultant in, and they felt that they'd explored the thing in the business when the report was done, but it's clear by some of the answers today that not everything has been fully explored. As a committee ourselves, we've already identified as one area where people could come in and use the cafe. If they were allowed to do that free of charge, you'd have more people coming in using the cafe and not having to pay £6 just to use the cafe. So that's one thing that we've just identified ourselves today as a committee. So we have to be sure that it's a bit like Brexit, really. If we can't get to where we want to be in the negotiations, then unfortunately we've got to look at a no-deal scenario.
I want to make a suggestion, because I probably end up that we've got the powers as a scrutiny committee to suggest to the cabinet member that we set up a time-limited working party, because this is what we're going to end up with. No firm. If we groundwork get out the frame, we're going to have to do something like this, and we've got the powers to do it, and we have. Yeah. We haven't done it for long. We've done it on certain other issues. This I think, is obvious conclusion, because we would need to put something in place. And they can't do it from the shadow board. We ain't got the people on the shadow board to do it. So what I'm suggesting is the next April, and meets 3 or 4 times as it needs to actually do that. We need to go back to Alan to ask him to set that in place. He should chair it in respect. And it would need to meet 3 or 4 times or as necessary. I'll try and make a suggestion. I think members, and that will obviously come from this committee, I would have thought.
Yeah, I take it that includes generating revenue streams. So the only thing I wanted to add is that I think we should see a full financial breakdown and the implications of the farm from now, not 2 years ago. We need that updated. We need to see all the numbers, including some of those numbers that are not shown within that paper, such as telephone and all the other costs that are sat in the GLL Wales, because we need to know what it looks like, because if GLL does fail, we're going out again, and we need that information if we're going to go out again.
I totally agree with that, Alan. The only issue I'd have, and it's not, is if they send us the numbers and we don't meet, what are we going to, what'll happen?
Why are you suggesting it working?
Yeah, no, I want the numbers, we all want the numbers, but does that mean we're going to have to discuss this again? Kath, can you help us with that?
Sorry, Chair, I just thought that when we come back to our next meeting, wherever that is, and we re-examine this, we'll have those numbers sat there, which will inform us. If it isn't within the week.
I'm just trying to, Kath, come in.
In the past, there has been instances where, as a committee, you felt that you haven't been able to come up with recommendations. That's normally as a result of members feeling not enough information was provided in the report. I don't necessarily think that's the case this time, because some of those things that you've asked for are still going ahead with the due diligence. So it's not that they haven't provided you with them, they haven't happened yet. But as a result, in the past, of not having enough information to help you form recommendations, we've had some working groups, if you recall, with the skinny bin recycling. Both you and Alan sat on that outside of the committee. It's not formal. You're all invited to attend, and obviously the more of you that do attend, the more you're going to get out of it. But you work closely in an environment with the people who are working on these things, so Dave and Stuart and the exec member, and pull things out and work on them and trial them and go away and come back. And then what Alan is saying, you would have to have access to the full papers, because without them you would only have half a story.
So from my perspective, we need those numbers, and there's no question of that. If we make a recommendation that there is a working group set up, and they have access to all the latest financial information, which and they'd have to, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
So that would meet that recommendation. So
I would welcome that, because I don't want the shadow board who's, you know, I'm not sure to come up. I don't want the shadow board sat there wondering what the hell's going on, to be quite honest.
no, well,
Yeah.
I think if we term,
Yeah.
will the members be happy if we term that recommendation around what I've just suggested?
That's really good.
Jason, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, I asked the question a few days ago, but why are we putting ourselves under pressure to meet an arbitrary timeline?
Yeah.
We could push this out by 6 months
Budget.
quite easily.
Budget.
Well, we've got a forecast to meet the budget that says we're going to give some entity £300,000 a year.
Yeah.
Why don't we push that out by 6 months and give them £150,000 in the first year and make the decision to do it properly, rather than pressurise ourselves?
No, comment on that. I'm sorry if I didn't make that point clear earlier. It's financial constraints, it's money. If that's in the budget already, and we'd be debating the budget, setting the budget going forward, if that's in the budget, then a difference has got to be found from taking that money off of something else.
But it doesn't already exist. If we're talking about giving it to Groundwork Wales for £300,000 a year, it already exists in the budget, I assume. So all we're saying is we're going to delay that process, and instead of giving them £300,000 in year one, we're keeping £150,000 to keep the farm running, but we're going to make the decision in that 6 month period rather than force it on them, which may not be the right decision for the farm.
I take on board what you're saying. I think in year one, they were looking to go ahead with achieving a cost saving of between 50 and 60,000 anyway. So it would have reduced the amount going to Groundworks Wales to about this 248,000 level that they were talking about. So yeah, if we're working on that basis, that there's still provision for the 244,000, then I take on board your point in terms of why the timeframes are so tight for January. It could, and as we've seen from the delays that we've already had in getting information from GWW, it could well be that it goes beyond that timeframe anyway.
Along with us asking that question, is there scope to extend the time frame of this in line with whatever the budgetary constraints are? I think that's legitimate. Yeah, we'll ask that.
Just to clarify, so to give it to someone else, to give it to Groundwork Wales, we're going to give them 350,000, but to keep it in, it's only going to cost us 247. Because they've already agreed that they can operate on 247,000. So
I don't think we know yet, Louise, because they haven't completed the due diligence. They don't know what the central costs are. The paper talks about potential additional subsidies. This is why I think Stuart was suggesting a work group is set up to look at this. The real numbers we don't know yet because the due diligence hasn't been completed. So, and we did ask the officers about this. By January, the due diligence is supposed to be completed. Groundwork Wales will have the numbers. The council will have to decide what money they're really going to put in based on actual costs or actual forecasts. So at the moment, these numbers, I'm not sure how firm they are. And that's why Alan in particular and Hugh were trying to get those numbers. You know, we need actual numbers. And when we were asking about pension liabilities at 2p, it's what are the real numbers? We don't know.
You're absolutely right. And one of the things I picked up when in reading the report is the amount of time it says we think potentially, maybe, could be. And you can't make a decision based on those kind of analytics. It's crazy.
The working group is set up and it has much firmer, because I don't know how firm these figures will be till we see them.
We can check them back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So can I come in?
Yeah.
Yeah, just firstly on that, it's generally accepted when you're looking at public and private sector, people working in local government sector have historically worked for lower wages because their pension contributions have been better than what they would have been in the private sector. So that, and I think they mentioned that, they alluded to that earlier, didn't they, that would be something that would have to be discussed as part of the due diligence process in terms of protecting pension rights for existing staff members and stuff. So that was just the small point. But I would like to say, if we are making recommendations and noting concerns, I have serious concerns, Chair, over the freehold, the possibility of the transfer of the freehold, and what's being proposed at the moment with these get-out clauses for 1, 5 and 10 years. I have got very major concerns over those, that even if this proceeded, if they did it for 12 months and decided they didn't like it for whatever reason, they can say, oh, we're exercising our right to get out of the contract. And I want it noted, please, I want it minuted, that I've got reservations and concerns about that.
Just so I'm clear, your concern is that with the freehold, you wouldn't want it, you'd want it to stay with the council?
I've got that concern
Yeah.
as well. I didn't want that either. I don't know why
No, I mean,
didn't know why you brought that back in again.
Well, my view, I mean, we'll get a general view. My view is we've talked about this as diamond, and I certainly think at 1.9 million, which was the figure, the council should retain control of the freehold. Maybe that we should, if we're in agreement, picking up on your point, that should be a recommendation that we would not wish to see the freehold leaving. I mean, that would mitigate one of the biggest risks, wouldn't it?
Additionally, Chair, that was the view of the previous scrutiny committee. There was an agreement amongst the previous scrutiny committee that we should protect the long-term interests of the Borough Council, so that we should retain the ownership, the freehold, ultimate freehold of the site.
I think just teasing out what you think, I think that's the view of this committee as well. I think there's no, there was
Could I just
Kathleen, make sure that's...
The previous cabinet didn't like that either. The previous cabinet didn't like that either. The idea of any freehold being transferred. And this is the point.
Sorry, it's a new committee.
I know that.
But the view is as if it's exactly the same. We're all nodding, so...
You're instinctively in the right direction.
Yeah.
Just to stay on that point, Chair, Dave Congreve mentioned the point that, oh yeah, but you have to look at the long term. In 50 years' time, councillors will be looking at financial pressures again and what they do with the asset. Well, I'm sorry, but none of us have a crystal ball. None of us know what's going to happen in 50 years' time, except for the fact that none of us will be councillors probably in 50 years' time. And the thing is, we're elected now, we have to represent our constituents now, and we have to do what's in the best interest for people now, during our term of office. Once we're out of office, we don't have any further responsibilities and liabilities to the constituents of our ward, and it's up to members in 50 years' time to determine what they do with this asset in 50 years' time. We need to make a decision based on what's happening now. Consensus is we want to retain this community trust, and so I think we shouldn't be distracted by saying, oh well, there's a likelihood that something different might be happening in 50 years' time.
Sorry, thank you. I'm just reading these three questions out. I mean, I'll read them again. No, because are members satisfied with the progress and diligence exercised in pursuing the agreed strategy? We've got some. I'll get Kath to summarise where we've got in a minute. Do members consider that the agreed strategy remains valid? Are members content with the proposed next steps and the wider implications? I mean, we've been talking about wider implications here. Are there any more wider implications?
Just my view, again, the strategy is correct, the execution of that strategy is not. And I think I would like to see a wider response returned. Whether you've got to make the proposal more attractive to get more people to bid on it, I don't know. But I would certainly like that process looked at again. And in terms of the workshop, I think one of the minimum outputs from it, as well as looking at the firm numbers, is that they suggest or mandate what the vision is for the farm going forward.
Related that.
is the workforce needs to have a clear terms of reference, including the 2 points that have been raised about firm financial figures and a clear vision, which we can incorporate. Can I ask Kath just to summarise the questions she's jotted down, and then we can see if there's anything else we want to add?
Okay, so these are not necessarily in the order of those questions that were asked, but one of the first key things that you all seem to agree on was, for the time being, you continue with the strategy with Groundwork Wales, because that's going to go on now until January. But whilst that is going on, work needs to be done to identify what TCBC wants from the asset in order to work towards a model and a mission. And overall, you will feel that without one, you're not able to move towards a model that could help.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing that was said, which originally we wanted to remain first. But lots of things have gone on since, so we might need to order these. Concerns to be noted about the procurement exercise and the risks involved only one party. So I think that sort of sits under the due diligence and the fact that it wasn't executed correctly. If unable to reach an agreement after negotiations, we could be back to square one, but a strategic vision going forward could assist with this, because by then, even if Groundwork Wales can't take it any further, if there's a vision, at least you know where you're heading towards. Accurate details of all the costs involved in the run-in needs to be provided. Important that a message is forwarded to the community that this committee supports the farm and wants to support it to keep it open, to alleviate concerns that staff, etc. might have, and visitors and patrons. So that I got that down. And then
I think if you say that, Kath, and we are working towards that as the ultimate goal, but at the same time we cannot give 100% certainty.
What? Why not?
Because we don't know that this is going to be the outcome.
I don't think you need to put that in as wasted.
Yeah, it's not part of the script.
no, all of that.
I'm worried people put that in.
Yeah, no.
Working towards it as the ultimate goal.
As the ultimate goal.
And stop there.
Yeah, stop at the ultimate goal. Yeah, I think that's there, but I wouldn't put it in explicitly.
No, it's a bit dangerous.
No.
Okay.
Because you're trying to reassure people, and there's danger.
No, it's a double negative.
Yeah, no, yeah, okay. Carry on, Kath.
Okay, then I've got a couple of comments down about working as groups. And I think Councillor Ashley mentioned asking the executive member if we could form a group to work with, so that we can...
Ask him, just do it ourselves anyway.
It depends where you want, which is where my next question
I
comes
think.
from. Do you think this is wider than this committee? Are there going to be other members? Because where Alan came in and said a member seminar, and the chair was quite right, that's just for information, so that wouldn't be the answer. But might there be other members that would have a view, that would want
and I thought
to
we
be
wanted,
part of the group?
And did we suggest that the actual executive member should be part of that? Or was
Yeah.
No, so wouldn't it really be for the executive member to set up the working group, not us? Well, I mean, what's happened before, Kath? You mentioned, what was the examples you gave us?
In the past, we've just
been us, isn't it?
put the recommendations forward that we felt more work needed to be done, and those recommendations went to the executive member, but they didn't necessarily have any involvement in the group itself. They were kept informed. But it's whether or not you feel... I think it is courtesy to keep the exec member informed in this, and also we'll need people like Dave as part of the group. It can't be just us. We need their expertise.
Can we suggest then we'd like to set up a working group, and we can invite the executive members who wish to be involved, and it's for him then to make his own decision without...
It's going to be multiple exec members, Chair, isn't it? Because if you think about this, you think of the aspects that this touches upon. You've got education, you've got regeneration, neighbourhoods possibly. So it's going to be multiple exec members, business and resources, you know.
Are we likely to get buy-in from a stack of cabinet members actually come into a working group? Is that
on this one? They were all interested.
Yeah, I'm only asking there's more experienced councillors here than me, but would they?
I think what you need to do is have perhaps somebody from the farm to work up their vision of what they might see how the farm is going to be in the next 10 or 20 years, and then bring people together to discuss it. Because if you just bring people together to discuss it, you'll be going around the table like we are now.
Yeah.
You need some kind of foundation to work on to start with.
The only problem with that, I'm afraid, and this is what we touched upon today in the meeting, this is what Sally said, we've done everything we possibly can under the existing constraints. And they feel that they genuinely have, because they've had consultants' reports, they've implemented a lot of stuff. They don't feel there's much more that they can do outside of the constraints that they've got, which is the freedom of applying for capital to improve the facilities there. But one of the girls, when we were walking around, said to me, "Oh, we'd love to extend the scope of the cafe and have a big extension on the side of it so we could seat more people." But again, that requires capital investment. I don't know that we would necessarily get the right answers from asking the people who work for the farm, what do you see as the vision being in 5 years' time? Because if it's taken over by Groundworks Wales will have a different vision anyway. And the vision that they might want to see for it is going to be largely dependent on whether they're going to be able to get access to these capital streams. It's one thing saying they're eligible to apply for the grants, but it's another thing actually getting the grants and getting that money.
But also, council, you might need to bring a couple of members of the shadow board in. You've got one guy, he's a farmer, I can't remember his name now, he's brilliant. He used to be WDA chair. He's actually very clever. And there's the other guy, it's the ex-borough treasurer, though he's quite old now, he's actually very sharp. A couple of them, I mean, they're actually very sharp, and that's why they're on the shadow board. A couple of, worth bringing in.
This is growing now.
No, yeah.
Is it worth me going away?
The farm has...
Yeah, I'm not disputing that. Is it worth me going away and trying to work out what we can do? Because some reference I think Councillor Bevan made was about the new workshop format, which is the cross-cutting scrutiny. We haven't got anything new to take there, but at least it would be something that all members could be involved in. If we start looking at ways of doing this now and inviting all these different people, it's not a constituted group, it's not a formal group. We need to think about what we're going to set up. I think what Dave was hoping today, maybe in an ideal world, was that you would be able to say either, yes, we support Groundwork Wales, or no, and we want you to go down this route. We're not there, so we're not in that place. And we need to think about perhaps terms of reference of the group, how long it's going to go on for, what you're hoping to achieve from it, because it's very much what Gwyn said. We could get this room filled and still keep talking about it, but we will not have any more capital.
Yeah.
So we need to think about how we want to take it forward.
Yeah.
So if I put a proposal to the exec member in the recommendations that we would like to form a working group, and then from there explore what avenues we've got and what we could do and what directions we could go in, and then I feed back to you and we start putting something together.
I think that's sensible.
Okay.
Kath, I wonder, I think we're not in a position to make a final decision. I think the working group probably would help. But, I mean, today, what you were saying, Dave was expecting us to go one way or the other. I think we are unanimous in that, yes, we want the work that's been undertaken on this to continue. We don't want to put a stop to the application by Groundworks Wales. He said, whilst this is continuing, they would be looking to implement the other cost-saving measures anyway, which we, I think, broadly support as a committee. So we want them to continue with that aspect to it. I wondered whether there was any merit in terms of putting together either the shadow board or the Friends of Association in touch with the rural development local action group, whether there's access to funding there, because they did mention that the Friends of group, because he said access to funding theoretically shouldn't be any different between the two organisations, whether it went through the non-profit making organisation or whether it went through Friends of the farm, coincidentally. But they are lacking the experience on the Friends side that the non-profit making organisation would be able to bring to the table. So could we do, whilst this is ongoing with Groundworks Wales, explore possible sources of funding through the Friends charity? Because that's already in
I
place.
didn't think it's not.
No, my experience, I was a grant giver for the Welsh Government for many years. The very small community groups, they tend not to get very far with grant applications because they usually lack expertise. The membership tends to be ephemeral, and they haven't got the governance structures and the financial structures in place. Now, recently, we've set up a Friends of Sandybrook Park group, and we've been very successful in getting Section 106 money to put a new park in. But the actual group itself, it's basically supported by one of the council officers, because they're great and enthusiastic, these people, but they haven't got the background. I think that was the point that Dave was making. Whereas Groundwork Wales, because they're experienced and they've got proper financial systems in place, they've got a much better chance of success. So the little groups tend to get small pots of money, maybe from a police commissioner or things like that. They don't tend to get the big money, and it's the big money we need for this, for things like all those things you mentioned about the dragon and the dilapidated park. Yeah, so sorry.
No, not at all.
Sorry.
I think I just wanted to clarify then, if I go away and try and get something in place about this group, but the main recommendation would be that we want to form a working group of, we're not sure how many people yet, this committee maybe plus more, and what we're aiming to work towards on that.
The other thing with setting up working groups, and they become, I think it's what Gwyn was saying then, another talking shop. No, and if you're going to have a working group, it needs to agree a firm terms of reference, and the other thing it needs to be time limited. You can't have a working group. We don't want a working group to have a meeting in a year's time and they're still coming up. No, it needs to be. That's my view.
Come in, just what's the purpose of the working group?
One of the issues that Alan raised where he left was no one's got any financial information, can we have it? And I asked then, this is where the idea came from, I asked then, well, that's great that we get these firm financial figures, but we're not going to meet again. And then out of that came, well, we could meet if we set up a group. Now, well, yeah, what was the... But
It was to tie up... So look.
do you want to come back in?
Yeah, on that point you made about time limited, we know what the time limits are going to be because they've already in the proposal already. So you're absolutely right. We can say if we're not in a position at that point in time to conclude with this proposal, at the moment we've got no plan B. There's no provision. So what we should say is that and this could be included in the scope of the remit for the working party, is to say, well, assuming we get to this point in time and it isn't concluded, what are the alternative propositions?
We've got to hammer this out. So, no, Jason did hit the nail on the head there. No, right, we're going to set a working group up. Now, what's the purpose, what's it going to achieve in a given time frame? No, we need to understand what we're asking. And I'm not clear now.
Well, we said Alan's financial information, basically what happens, plan B, is quite simple, really.
I think you just need a vision of where this committee or this council wants, what it wants Green Meadow to deliver in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Catherine, that.
And then you can actually work towards that.
Okay, look, Kath, come back in, please.
This takes back to the first recommendation that was made, which was continue with the strategy with Groundwork Wales, but whilst this goes on, work to identify what TCBC wants from the asset in order to work towards a model. So we're back to the thing of we don't know what we're trying to achieve from the farm.
So that'll be the purpose.
So that'll be the purpose, perhaps, is to work towards what do we want.
Good discussion, because we're getting where if the working group is there to do that. Dave, Councillor Thomas.
Yeah, okay. So with the working group, I'm confused now as well. So with the working group, the working group, we get the financial figures from just the community farm, or we get financial figures from the whole council?
We want which was Alan was making these points. We want firm figures of how much it really costs to run this farm, the whole ambit. What is missing at the moment is the stuff from pensions, that's a bit, and all the central overheads. You know, all these people who work in the farm, they use council laptop, computers, the IT infrastructure. There's a central overhead as well. So, and if you read the Groundwork Wales paper, that's what they're doing at the moment. They're trying to identify properly all those costs, and we haven't seen them. And it's going back to what Councillor Shepherd was asking. What are they? We don't know.
So the bottom line is, with this in general anyway, is the community farm needs money. So if that's the case, wouldn't it be better? I mean, I'm not new, so I may be wrong, but wouldn't it be better if we need money and we need to find money, we need to find out where all money's going? Wouldn't this be better to bring it to the full council?
No.
We're having a good discussion.
Chair, no, I don't think it'd be. I think we'd be talking if it went before full council and we didn't have a set of a firmed up recommendation written down in writing for members to vote on. We'd be here for a week, a month of Sundays debating it with everybody having their view on it. For stuff to go to before full cabinet, there's got to be a very specific motion that's being proposed and seconded, generally with the full backing and support of the Labour Party. But no, I'm not going to bring politics into it. I was just going to say, picking up on. Sorry, chaps, can I finish, please, before you.
One at a time.
Just picking up on the point you made there, Councillor, you're right. It's all about money, and they need money. I think that should be part of the remit for the working group as well. It ties in with the finances, the numbers that we're getting for the cost of the run-in. And it also ties in with the vision as well. If we decide that, or the council, executive members and us as a committee decide that the model, or even the working group, if it's going to go through the working group route, decide the vision is going to stay the same for the farm in terms of community asset and educational provision, we have to determine how much money Torvine is going to put into it and for how long are we prepared to continue to subsidise it for. So we do need the vision, ties into the vision, and it ties into the finances as well in terms of costs of running the fund, and if we've got to sustain that going forwards.
Just say, the idea of a working group, the one we did before on bins and things, is dead simple. You look at a set of proposals, you look at some costings, and you can't do that in a full council. You need a few of you around the table, optimum number 8 apparently. You might be right about it getting too big. And you look at proposals and then you take them to somewhere else, send to cabinet, send it back to resources, whatever. It does need in one way you are right, it does need a decision making process. You are right, Dave. It's for us to know what the picture is, and that we can't do the picture in this meeting in a lot of ways. We discussed the scrutiny points, and we got some answers to go to our report back, who is obviously the the cabinet member. But at the end of the day, we've left with some inclusive points which we need to work on. We maybe 1, 2, 3 meetings and a time date, and we need the vision thing. We need the money. We need to know what the income is. We need to know what the expenditure is. Now, I sit in a shadow board which lasts for about an hour, and I get this blather picture, thing that says what the income, what the expenditure is, and I sit there and want to make sense of it sometimes, and I can't, because what I need is what I'm asking for now in a lot of ways, because I get this thing that comes from Dave, and sometimes where they make sense of it, because you've got the information, you've got the data, but you need a specific thing. Now, the example we had in the past when we took a look at the revenue and we looked at options, that was done beautifully, and we actually sat there and made some sense of it because we had time to look at it. And it's the sort of thing we need to do with this, a considered look at something. Now, the council's good at that when it focuses on something, then you then take it back into the... And that's what we as politicians in the policy process need to look at. It's a very good process once you've done it. That's what a time limit working group is about.
But we certainly...
Does everyone thinks it doesn't go to full council, or just...
If you said that full council, you couldn't handle the full council. You need these working groups are done all the time. Cabinet members do all the time.
The working group will that search for money? Yes, that's my point.
I'm trying to understand still what the output of the working group is. So we've talked about finance. So we're going to go to a working group. We're going to get a group of people in front of us and say finance. It's good or bad,
or policy.
We're looking at giving them proposals, of which we've received only one, which arguably isn't anything to present. And the only thing so far that I can see the need for a working group in which we're all going to spend, hours, probably times 3 or 4 times discussing is a vision, which is something that probably needs doing once.
But we're asking.
Can I come in on that point there? Because I clear up a bit of misunderstanding that's going on in my head now. I thought we were going to let the officers get on with the proposal.
Yeah.
I thought the working group was only going to be if we got to a certain point in time and those proposals weren't proceeding any further, and we were looking at proposed alternatives to the Groundworks Wales. I didn't think we were setting up a working group to look at the work that the officers were already doing. I thought we were only doing this as a contingency, plan B, if this proposal didn't go through to its conclusion. And in terms of reference for that working group, I think they could also look at possibilities of sponsorship and or external partnerships. This is assuming now that we're not going down this route of Groundworks Wales, worst case scenario. But I don't see the point in us having a working group set up to replicate a lot of work of what the officers are already doing. I think we need to get to the point in time that the Chair mentioned next year, and if we're not got a firm proposal in place to proceed with, then that's the time we look to bring in the working group.
This is why I was trying to get to the bottom, and I said I was going to... I'm not a big fan of working groups from past experience, if I'm honest. But we seem to be swaying the other way now. So
the bottom line is,
Okay, so could we answer their question in as much as you wish them to continue with the work they're doing with Groundwork Wales, put in a caveat then that if that fails, come January or whenever it is, that there are members of this committee who are willing to set up a working group to look at it. In the meantime, what you would like from the executive member and his teams are to look at what does TCBC want from this asset in order to put together a working model. At that point then, everything's going along, Groundwork Wales is ticking along, and it's either yes or no come January. If it's yes, well then obviously things will develop and it'll go to Cabinet and all the other things that will happen. If it's no, at that point, the executive member will have had time between now and then to consider what we've discussed today, the recommendations, putting together what do we want from the council, and then if he feels that it would benefit us to get into a working group, members can be invited towards that. How about that as a starter?
Sounds good.
Yes.
Yeah. As for money, February the 1st, off the top of my head, I think is going to be a cross-cutting workshop scrutiny in the same way as Councillor Bevans mentioned, and it's going to be on the budget. So at that point, all members, all scrutiny members, will be invited to that workshop, and that workshop will be looking at all the council's budget,
And that will give us an
which will incorporate, obviously, Green Meadow. But it will be everything else as well, the 1st of February, I thought. First, I thought. I can look it up.
No, so I'm chairing it, so.
You are?
I am, I think. Yeah.
Where do we stand if the vision that's generated by the council does not align with the Groundwork Wales proposal?
As a committee, we would have to make a recommendation not to proceed with it, I guess, if there's a big disparity, or perhaps if there's any mitigations that can be found, and maybe we put recommendations, at least search for mitigations. It depends on how far apart we are, really, I guess.
The other items on your are all things that you want noted, such as I've lost where I was now. Such as concerns about the get-out clauses for 1, 5 and 10 years, concerns about the freehold, and how as a committee you want to stress that you wish the freehold to remain within the council.
Plus that was the view of the previous
and the previous committee, yeah.
Yeah.
And sending out a message to the community that this committee supports the farm and wishes to support it to keep open to alleviate concerns that might be had by staff or users of the farm, and that's what you'll work towards as your ultimate goal. So they were comments. The only recommendation I think now
the
that we can come
recommendation about
to,
the staffing was that there was trade union involvement, Kath.
I think that would happen anyway as it gets further down the line.
discuss that
But that's because I don't think they're at that point yet.
No, but I think we should...
Involving trade union. I'll try to find some way to put that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Trade unions to say that we're trying to keep their jobs safe.
Okay, and it's just... Together. Sorry, Kath, I'm getting tired now. Kath will put the performer now with recommendations together.
I will.
And you'll agree that with me, won't you?
I will.
And then that will go off to the executive member. So, hang on, gentlemen, not quite. There's a couple of other things now. I'm going to close.
It's all right, I'll do it.
Yeah, I'm going to close the meeting now. Just to remind members that we've got a scrutiny meeting on Thursday, the 14th December, when we're going to be discussing. The topic will be preparation of Torvine's tree policy. I'd like to thank members, officers and invitees for attending and contributing to the meeting. I'm closing the meeting to the press and the public. I would also like heartfelt thanks to Kath and Rachel, because these meetings would never happen and be run as smoothly without all the work that they do in the background. It's not the work of us, it's the work they do that really makes things smooth. Finally, there's a...
Close it now and then we'll...